that a lot of the stories here aren't actually real, despite this being a sub for True Scary Stories. That said, I can promise you everything that recently happened to me on my taxi ride home is 100% real and incredibly scary. I'll be brief with the basic facts and get to the heart of what happened. I'm not sure if anyone here may remember me from the story I told about my missing professor, but as I wrote then, I'm a TA at my university, and since the disappearance of the professor, I've been working very late in an attempt to catch the temporary professor up on what's going on. Before the professor disappeared, I would usually be free and plenty of time to catch the bus home. But recently, I haven't finished until well after midnight. Since taking the bus home has been out of the question, I've had to take Ubers home. Despite being your stereotypical poor college student, a little cash from the new professor has made this possible. The first few days I called an Uber, but after a friend told me about the cabs that cruise the bars on the edge of campus for fares that time of night, I decided I'd just catch one of them. I'd walked the 2 short blocks to where the taxis were supposed to be and was happy to see my friend was right. I noticed a cab sitting by itself, probably 50 yards from the others, and approached it. Knocking on the driver's window, he rolled it down and I asked if he was available. He took a long look at me, up and down before he answered. "Sure, kid. Get in." Without a second thought, I jumped in the back and gave him my address. He lazily started the car and pulled onto the road. As I sat back in the seat, a memory creeped in front of my mind. "I thought you guys were supposed to be going out of business." I could have sworn that I'd read somewhere that this particular cab company had gone bankrupt and was closing sometime last year. I guess the strange purple color of the cab had reminded me of this. He paused for a moment before he answered. No kid. It wasn't us. You must have had us confused with somebody else, I don't know." Since I wasn't sure, I figured he was right. It had been at least a year ago, and a lot of stuff had gone through my mind since then. No sooner than I'd sat back again, I noticed that the cab's meter wasn't running, or even turned on for that matter. Hey dude, you forgot to turn on the meter." This time he just raised his eyes to meet mine in the rearview mirror. "No way, kid. We don't use those dinosaur things anymore. We have an app to keep track of the fares. Works with GPS and all that. Just sit back and relax." As he had said that, he waved his phone at me real quick. But what I saw on the screen just looked like the regular timer function on your phone. Like before, I deferred to him. After all, I was a European history major, not someone that makes apps. I took his advice and finally sat back in the seat and tried to relax. We'd gone about 5 blocks, and I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the light. I shined it on my wrist to check the time. I wanted to see if I had enough time to have a few beers before I crashed. Tomorrow was going to be just as hectic, so I wanted to have a few to take off the edge. "That's a nice watch you got there." It appeared that while I was checking it, the driver had noticed my watch. "Is it a Rolex? One of those date thingies?" Yeah, it was my grandfather's. He handed it down to my dad when he graduated college, and my dad did the same to me when I got my bachelor's." This was the first time of the night I became a little nervous. He knew well it was a Rolex, and the actual name, too. Until he noticed my watch, he'd been quiet and uninterested in me. But the second he did, he became very animated. I've been wearing this watch for over a year at this point and never once worried about wearing a gold $15,000 plus watch until that cab driver asked me about it. He went back to his business again, but from that point on, I stayed aware of what he did. Like any normal person, I tried to relax and disregard my instincts. About a minute after our conversation, he picked up his phone from the seat next to him and made a call. Since I was already suspicious of the driver, I did my best to hear what he was saying, but he spoke very quietly and was only on the line for about 30 seconds, so I was unable to pick up on any of it. Once he put the phone down, I leaned back in the seat to appear uninterested in him. He paused for a moment and then told me his friend had just called and asked him to swing by and pick him up because he had an emergency. That was strange because I'd been watching him, and I didn't notice the phone ring or even make a vibrating noise. He assured me it was on the way and I wouldn't be charged any extra. Of course, by now, my paranoia was starting to get the best of me, but I didn't want him to see it, so I told him it was no problem. I guess he figured he had me eating out of the palm of his hand because I noticed a little grin grow across his face when I peeked at him in the mirror. It was at this point where I began to form a plan in my mind. Although he'd not given me any overt reasons to be scared, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in trouble. The second he did anything that didn't seem right, I was bailing out. Forget the physical consequences. We were within a few blocks of my place, so I figured if he was going to try anything, it would be soon. Just to be safe, I removed my Rolex as inconspicuously as possible, wrapped my hoodie around it, and stuffed them into my backpack. He hadn't stopped to pick up his friend yet, and we were approaching a stop sign where he would have to take a right to reach my apartment complex about a quarter of a mile down the road. When we came to a stop at the sign, I decided this was going to be the place that he had to make his move. Either he would turn right, stop and pick up his friend, where I would go ahead, pay him and walk the rest of the way home, and he would be free to do whatever for his friend, or he'd turn left, go 100 feet in the direction of the highway where no one lived, take a right down an abandoned alley where his friend was waiting to assist him in robbing me and possibly worse. I'd gradually moved to the right side door, so if I was forced to bail, I'd be close to the curbside where the grass was. As the car began moving, I grabbed the door handle and double-checked the lock to make sure it wasn't engaged. When he pulled away, the car started turning to the right. Before I could let out a quiet sigh, he cut the wheel back to the left and said, "Oh, I forgot my friend lives just on the other side of the highway. This'll just take a second. He should be outside waiting for us." I snidely say to myself, I bet he is. He must have thought I didn't know the area, but I grew up around there and was well aware there was nothing but fields on the other side of the underpass. The second the cab reached the opposite side of the intersection, I said a quick prayer and bailed out of the cab. Despite landing on the grass side of the curb, it didn't hurt any less. Even before I could get to my feet, I heard him yelling from inside the cab. He was still trying to go along with the ruse, saying something about owing him money, but I didn't hear it at all. I knew as soon as I hit the ground I wouldn't have long, so I got to my feet as fast as possible and began running for the alley that ran behind my complex. My hip was hurting, so it was hard to go very fast, but once I looked back at the cab and saw him making a U-turn and heading toward me, the fear gave me speed. I had not been thinking when I told him the address of my apartment complex, but I realized I hadn't given my exact apartment number. So, he wouldn't have any way to track me down as long as he didn't see me enter it. Since the alley ran behind my complex, I was hoping I would be able to hop the wooden fence and sneak into my place without him seeing me. I knew he was aware of the general area of where I lived. Therefore, when I saw his headlights stop at the end of the alley and then take off again, I deduced he was going the other way in hopes of cutting me off. My lungs were burning, but I kept running as fast as I could. About 3/4 of the way down the alley, I could see the lights of my complex on the other side of the fence. Looking ahead of me down the alley, I expected to see headlights, but I saw none. The thought that he may be waiting for me on the other side of the fence crept in, and although the fact terrified me, I knew the only place I'd be safe was my apartment, despite the fact the fence was 8 feet high, roughly, and I'd never been much of a high jumper. I didn't hesitate. On my first try, I grabbed the top, but my foot slipped back down. However, on the second, I had enough strength to pull myself to the top and over to the other side. I was happy to see boards going across to step on and let myself down. I was even happier to not see his car sitting and waiting. Once I had my feet back on terra firma, I took a second to catch my breath and look around. For a moment, I was unsure of exactly where I was, but once I started walking, I saw my building off in the distance between the two in front of me. At that point, only 100 yards of concrete and grass stood between me and complete safety. I did my best to be as quiet as possible as I approached the two buildings ahead of me. Creeping with slow, light steps, I walked between them and slowed even more as I reached the corner. I peeked carefully around it and scanned slowly across the open courtyard. It was well lit, and I knew running across it would put me in the wide open for anyone to see, but I had no choice. Taking one more quick look and letting out a big sigh, I ran as fast as I could for my building, praying to myself the entire time. It may have seemed an eternity, but less than 30 seconds later I was at my door. I fumbled with my keys until I found the correct one, and then, just like that, I was inside and safe. I dropped to the floor, fighting back tears of joy. I laid there just a brief moment before I saw the lights of a car creeping outside my building. I crawled over to the window facing the parking lot next to the road. Making as little movement as possible with the blinds, I slowly raised one rib just a bit and looked out. The cab driver was slowly cruising around the lot, looking out his window. Even scarier was that another man was in the passenger seat doing the same thing. He must have picked up his partner in crime, and they were looking for me. I continued to watch them creep around the parking lot for a while until they gradually got further and further away. I was far too afraid to turn on the lights, so I just laid there in the dark until I dozed off. It wasn't until around 9 a.m. that I woke up. I made a cup of coffee and kicked back on the couch to reflect on the activities of the night before. I considered calling the police, but quickly thought the better of it. I had no proof that he was planning on robbing me. From the police's perspective and the cabbie's records, I would look like any other guy running away from paying what I owed him. So that was out of the question. Then I remember the thing that caused this mess in the first place, my day date. For a moment, I didn't know where it was, but then remembered where I had stashed it and grabbed my pack. As I reached in, I held my breath because I was almost positive my contact with the ground damaged it. I unrolled it from my hoodie, and there it was, not a scratch on it and ticking away. I guess it really is true. You get what you pay for. I would have hated to have been the son that ruined a 3-generation tradition. It seemed very possible that the cab driver was going to search for me for a couple of days at least, so I called the professor and told him I was sick and wouldn't be coming to classes for the rest of the week. This wasn't totally untrue. I was sore from my meeting with the ground. Not to mention I was getting burned out going to class all day and then staying there late to catch him up. From time to time, I've peeked out my window the last 2 days to see if I caught sight of the taxi, but I gladly have not. While I was eating dinner last night, I remembered the discussion we had had about the company going out of business, and just to satisfy the nagging feeling I still had in the back of my mind, I Googled the company name, and what I found made my blood run cold. Not only had the cab company folded earlier the year before because of competition from companies like Uber, another result I found discussed an auto auction being held a few months later, where several cabs once belonged to the company were being auctioned off. My God, I've been right all along. I bet that guy bought a cab at that auction and was using it to illegally pick up fares after the bars closed. I must have looked like a big rube he could get a little money out of, but once he saw my watch, I became probably the biggest payday he'd ever had. I'll never second-guess my instincts ever again. That was the moment the full extent of it all hit me. I spent the next hour heaving my dinner into the toilet. I'm fairly sure tomorrow when I return to school I won't have the cab driver and his pal to worry about, at least I hope. But the memory of the incident will no doubt stay with me for quite some time. I'll be sharing this story with my friends and family. I would recommend everyone who reads this to do the same. For the sake of those you love and yourselves, keep your wits about you, especially after a night of drinking. Be very sure the cab you're getting into is a licensed one, and if you have any doubt, make your Uber or Lyft driver prove he is actually who he says he is. A South Carolina female fell victim to a very similar incident I did recently, but she didn't realize she'd made a mistake until it was too late. Please don't make the same mistakes as us. Don't let this be you. We got a call for pickup at 1236 Collins. They're going to the airport, you got it? Sure, I'm on it. Those were the first words spoken in what would end up as one of the scariest and most nerve-wracking days of my young life. I wouldn't have a more grueling day until the birth of my first child. That at least was a positive experience. This was truly the exact opposite. It was still early in the day and I had already drove one couple to the bus station. Things were looking up, a welcome change from the previous 4 days. The fare was in an upper-crust neighborhood. Those folks would often tip big money if you got them to where they were going quickly. From call to door took me 7.5 minutes. Hardly a record, but it had likely earned me a decent tip. No one was outside waiting, so I made a quick beep with my horn. A moment later, a cute blonde stuck her head out of the upstairs window. "Just a minute." I slipped the transmission in the park and leaned back leisurely in my seat. That summer of 1980 had to have been the hottest in memory. Even with the AC on, I was still soaked. My mind began to wander. A moment or two later, the cute blonde came out to the cab, but she wasn't alone. A dirty, long-haired man came out with her. When they got into the cab, I could tell that they were junkies. "Where's your luggage? We're going to the airport, right?" They looked at each other for a second before answering. "Yeah, sure." The dirty guy confirmed this, but said nothing about their bags. "Okay." I shrugged my shoulders and turned around. It wasn't my job to read hopheads. I started the cab up and pulled away. For most of the drive, nothing much was said. They would whisper to one another on occasion, but not at a volume I could hear. I'd catch a glance at the blonde in the mirror at brief intervals. She caught me a few times, looking, and smiled. Each time she flashed her now decayed teeth, I felt a small pang of sadness. She'd obviously been a beauty before the dope took over her life. You could still see this when you saw her from a distance, but as you approached, the deep wrinkles and open sores made her vices painfully obvious. These were my thoughts when the man called out to me. "Hey man, there's a change of plans. We're gonna need you to take us out somewhere else." As he said this haphazardly, he pointed ahead to a sign. "We need you to go over the viaduct to Polk." His words made me bristle. Not only was I not going to change the destination, I knew the area around Polk was dangerous. He more than likely wanted to score something. I didn't care what he wanted. I wasn't going anywhere near that place. "Listen, I'm sorry, son. Once we had set a destination, we can't just change it. It's a former driver security. You understand? There's plenty of cabs at the airport. You can catch another one there, and then you can take it where you want to go." Of course, this wasn't completely true. I could change the route as long as I called in and told dispatch. Fact was, I wasn't going anywhere near that place. Odds were no other driver would either. I looked into my rearview mirror as I told him this. I noticed the blonde whisper something to him. A smile grew across his face as she said it, and a confident air began emanating from them both. They certainly confused me. I wasn't sure if they understood what I'd told them. Perhaps all the drugs that they had taken had finally fried their brains. They in fact understood me fully. It would appear that I was the one that didn't grasp the importance of the situation. They were going to have to show me. "You don't seem to understand, old man. You're driving us there whether you want to or not." His arrogance made me laugh. However, when I looked up into the mirror, I knew why. I came eye to eye with a cocked .38. Now it all made sense. They likely never had any intent on going to the airport, and they knew if they said anything about Polk, dispatch would have never sent me. That meant nothing now. I was going to do what they told me to do, and hopefully I wouldn't get shot in the process. "All right, I got the point. You can put the gun down. I'll take you over to Polk." As I said it, they both chuckled and the guy lowered the pistol to his lap. "Well, I'm glad we comprehend each other now." He pointed again to the viaduct exit and I took it. The viaduct was nothing more than a big bridge that took traffic over the train tracks below. It had always been the artery that connected the safer, more productive part of the city to the crime-ridden ghetto on the other side of the tracks. We never went over to it, and I hadn't until today. As my wheels pulled onto it, a sick feeling began boiling in my gut. I wasn't really sure what I was going into. I hadn't been over the tracks since I was a kid. It was the early 60s then, even before the viaduct, and the neighborhood was okay. However, after the race riots a few years later, I figured I'd be safer on my side of the tracks, and hadn't been back since. I'd heard stories and seen various pieces in the paper about how much it had changed, but I knew no one who had seen it firsthand. Coming down off the viaduct, things looked basically the same. As I drove deeper into the neighborhood, however, things began falling apart. It was actually really sad. The little barbecue place I used to go to with my dad was boarded up. What I saw was decay, not danger. I quickly wiped a tear away from my cheek and asked my captors where I was headed. I had yet to turn around to address them. I was afraid to get nervous and just shoot me. All of our discussions were done through the mirror. "When we reach Polk Street up here, take a left and pull over." The end of the sentence made the taste of bile grow stronger in my mouth. I glanced down quickly at his lap, and the gun was still there, cocked in his grip. Was he going to end my life and leave me here? My body began shaking, but I fought to stop it. I didn't want him to see fear. I had never been so afraid in my life. I wiped my sweaty palms onto my slacks and swallowed the massive lump in my throat. When I reached Polk, I turned to the left and went ahead about 20 yards before I pulled over. I smoothly slid the shifter into park and shut off the ignition. Instinctively, I sat upright and swallowed one more time. My mouth was bone dry, and I knew if I spoke, the words would tremble. As I sat there staring ahead, the cab was silent. Off in the distance, two boys played catch with a football in the street. The silence was maddening. Was this the end? What did they have planned? My thoughts went to my family. I hoped my wife would be notified somehow. Would she get my body, or would I stay in this cab rotting away for God knows how long? The dirty guy finally spoke. "Take off your watch and pass that through your wallet back to Annie, and don't turn around when you do it." So that was the blonde's name. They were definitely going to pop me, since he was using names. I did my best not to let them see me shake as I did it. When I passed them back, I could feel the trembling. She let out a little chuckle as she took them from my hand. Well, they had everything they needed, and this was probably it. "Now hand me the keys." This made me even more terrified. They were going to shoot me and take my cab. It looked like my wife was never even going to be able to bury me. I did my best to hide the tears. I could hear the couple begin to shuffle around in the back. I was terrified to look in the mirror. I didn't want to see it coming. I took one more big gulp and closed my eyes. As I waited, an image of my wife appeared in my mind. She was wearing a beautiful little red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. Her hair was up, and she was sitting in our Lincoln. It was the most beautiful I'd seen her since our first date. The sound of a car door opening came from behind me, but I ignored it. This was too wonderful of a sight to leave, but the sounds of people running soon after roused me from my fantasy. I was too afraid to turn around at first. Slowly, I opened my eyes and peeked at the furthest point of my vision that I could. It looked like the door on the passenger rear was open, so I summoned up the courage to glance at my rearview mirror. There didn't look to be anyone there. When I finally turned around, a feeling of relief overwhelmed me. It appeared they didn't want to kill me. They'd got what they needed and took off. At that moment, I didn't care that I was $50 lighter. I was just happy to be alive. The celebrations continued for the next few minutes until the weight of the situation dawned on me. Alive or not, I didn't want to be in this neighborhood after dark. From the way it was looking, it was getting into late afternoon. Although it was summer and the sun didn't go down until 9, it was going to take me a while to hotwire the cab. Walking wasn't even a consideration. I twisted myself upside down and under the dash. I'd never hot-wired a car before. However, I was going to try my best to find out how. It took me about an hour to figure out the wiring setup. Another 15 or so later, the sound of the ignition turning over shocked the cab to life. "James Sayer cab, 1128, answer right now, where are you?" The panicked yells of my dispatcher Cheryl came blasting from my radio. I took a second to catch my breath before I responded. What in the world was I going to say? I did my best to explain all that had happened that morning as I drove back toward the garage. It was a tad bit after 3 when I finally pulled in. My first priority was to call my wife and let her know that I was doing okay. Since my keys had been taken, I told her there would be a guy coming to the house to change the locks. Her voice was so beautiful to hear. I reluctantly let her go when the police arrived to take my report. After sitting down with them, I took the rest of the day off. I was still pretty shaken up about all that had happened. My generation didn't have a war. It hadn't hardened to the prospect of dying. The wife and I spent some time holding each other. I wiped her tears as we made plans of future trips together. I promised to spend less time working and more at home. The locksmith showed up soon after. All the locks were changed, and I took the Lincoln to the dealership the next day to have it rekeyed. I returned to driving a day or two later. Day by day, I became less jumpy, and the fear of having someone behind me got less and less terrifying. Despite my expectations, the dopeheads were eventually caught. The blonde did indeed spawn from an affluent family, and her charges were ultimately dropped. The dirty man did some months in county. I had lost interest in the case by then. My son was on the way, and I was working any spare moment I had, so we'd had enough. Our anniversary came a few months before our son arrived. We stuck to the promises that we made that night. The family saw a lot of the country those years, and her and I still rent a cabin in Colorado from time to time. I stayed on the streets for the next 15 years. No incident near that bad ever happened again. I've been working dispatch since 1995. A combination of bad luck and failing eyesight forced the change. I don't really mind anyway. People drive like crazy these days. With the rise of companies like Uber, I figured our line of work won't be around much longer. With my part in the business coming to an end, I'd like to pass on one bit of advice that comes from my experience. In a time full of no end and distractions, please pay attention to who you let into your cab. Drug-crazy thieves and gun-wielding dopeheads don't seem to be going away anytime soon. The following is an excerpt from a letter discovered among my grandfather's papers by my father and myself while making an inventory of his estate upon his death on February 15, 2019. Keep in mind, none of the assertions made within have been confirmed at the time of posting, and considering the time in which the events were said to have taken place, it may never be possible to confirm them. In addition, at the time it was written, my grandfather was already in the advanced stages of brain cancer. The things he is claiming more than likely were symptoms of his illness and may have not actually even occurred. Please keep these things in mind as you read this, as it pertains to the publishing of this document. We are only making this document public at this time in the interests of justice. If any of the names or incidents herein are familiar, or if anyone has any information pertaining to said people or incidents, please leave your contact information in the comments. Thank you. My name's Donald McIntyre Campbell. This year I reached my 91st year on this earth. Recently, due to severe headaches, I consulted my doctor. During the course of testing and the like, it was discovered that I have a large mass of cancer growing in my brain. Because of my age, mostly the great minds in charge of my care determined there was no possible treatment for my illness. Because of this conclusion, I was told I could not expect to see my 92nd birthday. Truthfully, I can't claim to be very upset with this prognosis. I have had a far longer life than most and can assure you all, did my best to live every moment of it honorably. There is, however, one incident I must relieve my soul of before I go before my Maker. Not because I am an especially devout man, but because I've never believed in leaving one's debts outstanding. The specific debt I'm referring to took place in the winter of 1951. Dorothy and I had been married 3 wonderful years. With the end of the war, jobs had been a little thin on the ground. Luckily for us, people were still dying. Therefore, she was able to find work as a part-time secretary at Blevland's Lackland Funeral Home. As for me, I've been at the sawmill since I was 15. The post-war suburban boom had well and truly begun by this time, and the demand for building materials was at its highest. I'd been moved into a supervisor's position the year before. Because of this, we were finally in a position to purchase our first home. Just a mere 2 months after my promotion, we found a nice 3-bedroom house not far from where I'd grown up. Now that we had purchased our home, we could focus more on starting a family. Don't get me wrong, we'd been allowing nature to take its course since we'd been married, but now having children had become our prime goal. It looked as if though our life was getting better by the day. That December, we both had been working as many hours as we could. Christmas was closely approaching, and we knew that would probably be our last holiday where it was just the 2 of us. The Red Chinese were slaughtering our boys in Korea. For all I knew, I'd be in a hole fighting commies the next year. We had one last chance to spoil one another, and I was going to make it good. Since we only had the 1 car, Dorothy would at some points have to get a cab to and from the funeral home. My surprise was a brand new car of her own. I couldn't wait to see her face. The week before, I made all the arrangements. The dealer would deliver the night before, so everything would be in place for the big reveal that morning. The evening of the 21st, Dorothy worked late, so I was left on my own to stir up dinner. The partners wanted to get everything caught up for the holidays. It was near 8 before I heard the cab pull up outside. I was enjoying an after-dinner beer next to the radio when she came in. I could tell from the get-go that something was wrong. Before I could get one word out, I was shut down. "I'm going to take a bath and go to bed." She had to have been starving, but I didn't push. We'd both been running ourselves ragged the past few weeks. The fatigue had most likely caught up with her, and she now deserved some time to herself. I had one more beer and hit the sack about an hour later. Dorothy was already deep asleep. I gave her a light peck on her forehead. She looked so peaceful as she laid there, as if she hadn't a care in the world. It wouldn't be until after the holiday that I would learn how terribly wrong I was. Once I'd switched off the bedside lamp, I too drifted off in mere minutes. The smell of bacon and coffee woke me up the next morning. When I sat down at the table, Dorothy still seemed a bit off, but still better than the previous night. She smiled very little, and when she did, it felt forced. Although I'd never seen her like this, we were in uncharted territory. I know if I had to keep all the balls in the air that she did, I would have collapsed far sooner. Nothing would be gained by nagging her. She knew if she needed help, I'd bend over backwards for her. Little was said the next few days, but I could see pieces of the old Dorothy peeking through. By Christmas Eve dinner, she was doing far better. The excitement in the air had us all smiling, even Dorothy. After dinner, we swapped gifts with her folks. They left around 8:30, and we had the house to ourselves. Before I could even get warmed up, she shut me down. We both went to bed that night with a frown on our faces. During a trip to the head around 2 a.m., I took a quick peek out the bedroom window. Just as arranged, Dorothy's brand new Ford was sitting in our drive wrapped in a big red bow. I slipped out of bed a little after 5 to get breakfast ready for my big surprise. Just after 6, Dorothy came down slightly groggy and full of questions. "Merry Christmas, honey. Hurry up and eat your breakfast. I still have to give you your present." When she'd awakened fully, she lit up the kitchen. Her beautiful light had returned, and I was elated. Breakfast went by in a flash. Now was the time for her present. With her hands over her eyes, we stepped out into the cold December morning. "Okay, open your eyes." The shock on her face was priceless. For a moment, she looked at me, unsure. "Merry Christmas. It's yours." I handed her the keys, and she ran over to get a closer look. I watched her as she played with all the switches and knobs. This had to be the happiest I'd seen her in ages. "Now you'll never have to take a cab again." My words hung in the air. Her face had dropped like a stone, and tears began pouring from her eyes. Without a word, she ran into the house, leaving me clueless. I tried to be understanding, but this was beyond stress. There had to be something she was hiding, and I was determined to find out, and I wished now that I never had. When I climbed the stairs, I found her sobbing on the bed. "For God's sakes, what is wrong with you? You've been walking around like a grump for the whole weekend." She said nothing, but the sobbing continued. "Say something." I felt bad even as I said it, but I was at my wit's end. As I sat next to her, I wrapped my arms around her. I was now at the point of begging. "Please, baby. You're obviously hurting. Let it out. Let me help you." She let out a long sigh and eventually spoke. The other night, Friday, the cab driver, he pulled over behind a building and he forced himself on me." Her words knocked the air out of me. I feared anything I said I may regret. Some time passed before either one of us spoke again. What was I supposed to say? Nothing could make it better. The best I could do was be there for her. I held her as she sobbed. As we sat there on that bed, a plan for revenge began to take shape in my mind. That piece of scum dimmed the light that had once shone so brightly inside my Dorothy, and he had to pay for it. Dorothy's reluctance to report the attack would ultimately play in my favor. Since there was no record, I would likely not be a suspect. Also, unless the sleazo had done it before and been caught, the police would possibly be in the dark regarding a motive. If I was going to do it and not get caught, I had to be careful. I was going to take at least a few weeks of planning. My pop always told me nothing was worth doing if it wasn't worth doing well. In this case, that would certainly apply. We'd fallen asleep that morning as we held each other. Around 4, I got up and started making dinner. After what she told me, I wasn't sure if she would feel like eating, but making dinner was the least I could do for her. I can't even pretend to understand women and how they think, let alone know what it would feel like for a woman as noble as Dorothy to have her self-respect ripped from her. Just thinking about it made me fume, but this wasn't about me. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for her to begin to put this behind her. As for me, I knew I couldn't until I punished him for this crime. Every day that passed was a little victory. Dorothy became more and more like she once was, and I would get a little closer to my prey. Weeks of casual conversation and a few anonymous phone calls finally led me to a name, Bobby Dunlap. He was 32, and other than a few misdemeanors, his habit of doing things to women had gone unnoticed by the cops. From what I could tell, no one was waiting for him at home either, and this information sealed the deal. Now all I needed was to pick the perfect time. After a phone call in which I pretended to be one of Dunlap's friends, I knew when he'd be working. Since the holidays had ended, I wanted to strike as quickly as possible. Moving forward was all I wanted at that point, so I chose that Wednesday to spring my trap. After dinner that night, I took my car to Patty's and had a few drinks. I made a call to the cab service to send Bobby to pick me up. Since I'd given the dispatcher a false address and name, I had little fear the call would be traced back to me. Dunlap arrived within a few minutes. This was the beginning of the second part of my plan. During our ride, I made small talk in order to relax him a bit. "So, you're a young and good-looking guy. You know of any girls we could get together with and have a good time?" It was obvious my plan was working. He wasn't even aware of where he was taking me. When we pulled up to the building, I didn't move or speak. He sat still in his seat, unsure of what I was doing. "What's wrong, Bobby? Don't you recognize the place?" He started shifting around in his seat. I could tell he was beginning to catch on. "That beautiful woman, That one you met on the 21st? That was my wife. When I said that, he really started squirming. No way, man. She came on to me. I didn't know she was married. His lies were starting to make me angry. I decided to move ahead with the final phase. You can lie all you want, scumbag. I know my wife. I would have been a lot nicer if you would have admitted what you did. The sweat was pouring down his face. He knew what I was going to do. The second I stuck my pistol in his neck, he shot upright. Drive us out to the lake, where we'll have some privacy. During the drive to the lake, he began shaking and the sweating became even worse. I had him pull up to one of the boat ramps and get out of the car. It was like he'd already given up. I didn't even have to tell him to get on his knees. I guess he thought that begging would change my mind. I'm so sorry. I couldn't help myself. It was time to end this. I'll see you in hell. 2 shots in the head and he was gone. I carefully removed my coat and slacks, exposing my coveralls underneath. Once I had loaded his body into the trunk, I removed the coveralls and threw him into the trunk with Bobby and the gun. Just to be sure I didn't forget anything, I sat for a moment in the car to collect my thoughts. When I was satisfied, I redressed and started the car. In one quick motion, I wedged a stone next to the gas pedal and threw the car into drive. Watching that cab shoot into the water gave me the feeling of accomplishment I'd been chasing for weeks. Even though I had a 7-mile walk and it was 23 degrees outside that night, I didn't feel a bit of it. In fact, that was the best I'd felt in months. I made it to my car around 2 and drove the rest of the way home. When I got there, Dorothy was already in bed. I tried not to wake her as I got undressed. If I did, she said nothing. The next morning at breakfast, she didn't ask where I had been the night before, and that's the way it was for the remaining 48 years of our marriage. As smart as she was, I'm sure she had her suspicions, but she held her tongue. After all, that was all in the past. We were moving forward. It was about a month later when I received my draft orders. Not until I came home in the fall of '53 did we finally get to start our family. Dorothy discovered she was pregnant with Donald Jr. in October. Christine was born in September of '55, and that was pretty much it. The adjustment period after coming home took a while. However, Dorothy was there to help me through the rougher parts. It wasn't until I lost her in '95 that I realized how much I'd come to rely on her. Now that it's my turn to pass on, the only hope I have is that I will get to see my Dorothy again. Since we are coming to the end of my story, I want to ensure all law enforcement involved with this case that no one in my family, living or dead, had any knowledge of what I did all those years ago. What occurred on the lake shore was only between myself, Dunlap, and God. Please don't hold what I did to that scum against my loved ones. Their only crime is being related to me, and that's no fault of their own. I ask whoever discovers this letter to turn it over to the police in whatever way they desire. This is my final confession of what I did to that cab driver, Bobby Dunlap, on the night of January 10th, 1951. May he burn in hell forever. Sincerely, Donald McIntyre Campbell. I would have posted this earlier, but I just returned from a week-long vacation with my mother in California. This whole mess I'm about to tell you all happened during my taxi ride to the airport last week. My parents separated and eventually divorced when I was 12. Per usual, it was decided I would live with my mom and spend the weekends with my dad. This was the living arrangement until it came time for me to choose a college. Eventually, I decided to stay in Oklahoma and go to school there. Since I wanted to stay, but my mom wanted to move to Los Angeles with her boyfriend, I lived with my dad my first year of school. However, every summer since she moved, I've spent a week or 2 with my mom in California. I was on the way to see her last week when something horrible happened. My flight was at 12:15 p.m. that day. I called the cab to pick me up at 9 a.m. that morning. Under normal conditions, the drive to the airport takes about 20 minutes. I always try to leave myself 2 hours before my flight to get everything done, so I knew, even with traffic, I'd arrive with plenty of time. The driver showed up a few minutes after 9, no big deal. At that time, I wasn't in any hurry, and he didn't appear to be either. We left my apartment at 9:10. At no time did I express any need to hurry, but from almost the second we pulled onto the road, he certainly was. I have a bit of a lead foot myself, so it wasn't until I heard the squealing of the tires that I spoke up. "Look, man, we've got plenty of time. You don't have to go so fast." I wasn't sure what he said back to me. However, he must have understood me because he let up on the gas for a while. He apparently took this as an invitation for small talk. Unfortunately, his accent was so thick I couldn't understand a word he said. I didn't want to come across as racist, so I just nodded along and smiled. It wasn't long after we started our discussion that he began picking up speed again. He seemed more involved in talking to me than paying attention to traffic. The cab was weaving in and out, avoiding cars and bicycle riders alike. Horns were honking right and left. We were stopped at a light, about 10 minutes from the airport. A man on a bike was stopped in front of us. When it turned green, the driver hadn't noticed at first. The bike rider was all the way across the intersection when he finally did. I guess he wanted to catch up with the rest of traffic. He floored it and shot across the intersection. The bike rider couldn't get out of his way fast enough, and the cabbie hit him with such speed, he and his bike launched over the top of the car and into the grass beside the road. I couldn't help but screech. The worst thing I'd ever seen up to that point was when another girl broke her ankle at cheer practice. This was far worse. I'm not even sure the cabbie noticed what he'd done until I screamed. He gave me a clueless look. Until I told him to stop, he seemed reluctant to do so. He made a U-turn and pulled into a parking lot across from the scene. The driver slowly stepped out of the car and crossed the street. People were already gathered around the bike rider. A few of them were attempting to assist him. The rest were talking to my cab driver. Since I was the cab, I couldn't hear what was being said, although I felt obligated to get out of the cab and actually do something. I didn't until the police and ambulance arrived. It was heartbreaking as I stood there watching the paramedics work on the cyclist. I couldn't tell if he was alive when they took him away, but he certainly didn't look good. My turn to speak to the police came, and I told them everything that had happened since I got in that cab. He seemed like a good guy, but I couldn't hold anything back. My opinion was, and still is, that he shouldn't be driving a cab. Hopefully the people who make that decision feel the same way. By the time the cops let me go, my plane was already gone. One of the officers arranged a ride home for me. I rescheduled my flight for the next afternoon. This time I ordered an Uber. The ride to the airport was at a regular speed, and I arrived in plenty of time for my flight. My mother and I had a great time, but the poor man on the bicycle was always on my mind. Since I got back yesterday afternoon, I haven't heard anything from the police about the cyclist's condition. When it comes to my cab driver, I'm not sure if I'll ever know of his fate. I plan to call into the officer handling this case in the morning. If I discover anything, I'll let you all know. Just a few days ago, I had the strangest experience I've had in the 10+ years of driving a cab. I picked up this well-dressed and good-looking middle-aged guy. However, when he opened his mouth, he said the strangest things. What started out as an entertaining discussion ended up as an all-consuming fear. I'm going to write down and post everything I remember that happened and was said between the two of us. Then, whoever reads it can tell me if I'm crazy or just being paranoid. Saturday night I was working the graveyard. Most of my fares come from bars. I just dropped off a pair of drunk bimbos. I only say bimbos because the redhead claimed she didn't have enough for a tip. Instead, she decided to show me her rack. Unasked, by the way. I admit they were nice, but I prefer girls my own caste. It was around 3 a.m. when I noticed a well-dressed, tall man waving me down. The neighborhood, combined with his fancy suit, spoke possible big tipper to me. Once he got in and closed the door, he removed his hat, a fine-looking straw fedora. His clothing and movie star good looks were out of place. I feared at first that I'd picked up a time traveler. I did the usual and asked him where he was headed. "I don't know, really. I'm in town on business and was looking for somebody to show me around." His answer made me chuckle. It seemed awful late for a sightseeing trip. "Hey, as long as you're paying me, mister, I'll drive you anywhere." And that was how it all started. For the next 2 hours or so, I showed him around town. The university, the Capitol building, the usual touristy stuff. At some point during our little tour, I remember why he said he was in town. "So what kind of business are you in?" His reply made me laugh even more than his first. The guy was a natural comedian. "I'm what people would call a contract killer." We've been having such a good time so far, I decided to go with the ruse. "Okay, mister, I'll play along. Well, tell me how it works. How does one go about hiring a contract killer?" "Well, a woman contacts me. How they do so, I'll keep to myself. If their reference checks out, we move on to business. She gives me names and any other info I asked for. If I decide to take the job, we move on to money. If we agree on a number, then I go to work." With all that anonymity, I asked him how he made sure he got paid after he offed someone. It appeared my choice of words made him laugh. "It probably wouldn't be wise to tell you that part. We professionals have to keep some secrets to ourselves." "Okay, fair enough. Well then, how does a client know you've completed the job?" I regretted asking the question even before I finished asking it. Even though it was a stupid question, he still entertained me with an answer, albeit with a tinge of sarcasm in his voice. "We live in a time with a 24-hour news cycle and multiple social media outlets. Don't you think if your dad died suddenly that someone's not going to contact your mother first? If you don't discover it on your own, someone's going to tell you. Once I'm paid, my relationship with the customer ends. She's ultimately on her own after that." The last part of his answer brought up another question in my mind. "If something goes wrong, per se, and she gets arrested or implicates herself, what do you do?" He thought for a moment before answering. I imagine he was considering how much he should say to a stranger driving his taxi. "Well, sometimes contingencies have been put in place to protect myself. First off, if I've done my job right, the client shouldn't have any information about me to give the cops. And if, on the off chance I screw up so badly that she can, I have multiple exit strategies. I certainly won't let the police get their hands on me. None of us get to live forever." There were a few times I had to remind myself this was all a game. He made it fun nonetheless. His imagination and forethought wowed me. We'd been playing this game for hours before I thought to ask him how he got started in his business. "I joined the army fresh out of high school. It seemed my work caught the attention of my superiors. They referred me to a couple of gentlemen in the government, and I've worked for them for 10 years before I made the decision to go into business for myself." "I gotta tell you, mister, you're really good at this stuff. You really should be a storyteller. If that's not what you're really doing for a living, I'm seriously impressed." And I wasn't blowing smoke. This was the most fun I'd had driving a cab in my life. I was used to dealing with drunks and arrogant businessmen. This was a blast. "Well, thank you, young man. I appreciate everything you've shown me tonight." I could tell by the way he was talking the night was coming to an end. It was just as well the sun would be up soon and I was beginning to flag myself. I took the opportunity to ask one more question. One I should have asked far earlier. He had said earlier in the night he was in town for business. Did that mean he was here to off someone? A sly grin grew across his face as he thought of his answer. Well, as a matter of fact, I was. However, I received a message at the last minute to cancel the hit. I get to keep the half she'd already given me, so I didn't mind. That's business. It happens on occasion. That's a woman's prerogative, after all, isn't it, to change their minds? I hope her and her old man work it out. Anyhow, that's how I ended up with you. Just as the first rays of the sun broke over the horizon, he pointed out a place to let him out. There were a few hotels at the end of the parking lot, and I assumed that was where he was headed. He reached over the seat and handed me $1,000 bill. Before I could argue, he told me to keep the change. It was twice what he owed, but I was too tired to disagree. Keep the change, kid. You earned it. I had a great time tonight. Thank you, mister. I had a great time myself, and thank you most of all for the awesome story. As he stepped from the cab, he said one last thing. And thank you for showing me around tonight, Adam. Take care of Linda, and stay out of trouble. I pulled out of the lot and headed for home. My hope was that Linda would have breakfast going, and that's when it hit me, like a hammer. How did that man know my name? Not to mention my wife's. My license was nowhere he could have seen it. I reenacted the night's discussion in my head. There was never a point in which I told him. It would have ruined the game. I didn't ask him his, and there was no reason for me to tell him mine. Certainly not my wife's. How did he know I was married anyway? I hadn't worn a ring in years. I lost it down a drain and never found it. I suppose he could have guessed. The problem with that is that Linda and I had just gotten back together last week. We'd been separated and considering divorce for 2 years before that. When I pulled into the driveway, a terrible idea came into my head. Was there a possibility that guy wasn't making up a story? No one would dare tell someone, even a stranger, in such a bold and frank way that he was a hitman. If he was serious, the fact he knew my name and my wife's could only mean one thing. Even if it was true, I wasn't ready to accept it. While Linda and I sat and ate that morning, I couldn't stop myself from watching her. I was terrified that my wife had wanted me dead. Even if she had changed her mind, there was no way she'd admit it. If I did ask, either answer would most likely destroy the fragile peace we've built between us. I need to know what the readers think. Am I crazy? Or is this really happening? I was in town recently and ran into a friend from college. I hadn't seen her in quite some time. She told me the story I'm about to share with everyone here. It involves another girl from school who had recently been the victim of an, until recently, unidentified serial murderer. The story he told the police of what she experienced that night makes any horror film pale in comparison. To preserve the privacy of her family members, I'll be referring to her as Fiona. Also, I will not be using the actual name of her killer. I refuse to let that filth's name come out of my mouth. I hope you understand. Fiona has always been an aspiring writer. Although she'd managed to have a few minor successes, the one big popular hit continued to elude her. Because of this, she still kept a day job. She's been a bartender at the local college-friendly bar. Therefore, when her and her boyfriend moved to Miami, she began tending bar again and making ends meet. The night she died, she stayed after her shift and had some drinks. Her fellow bartender that served her that night said that although she was intoxicated, she wasn't fall-down drunk. She most likely still had some of her decision-making faculties left. After you read what she went through, you may wish she was blacked out. The bartender on shift called Fiona a cab. She left 15 minutes later, and that was the last time anyone saw her. This cab ride would prove to be her last. Still unknown to the world, her driver, John Smith, as I will refer to him as, had taken the lives of 6 other women over the past 10 years. Fiona was about to be the 7th. The only positive thing we can take away from her losing her life is it causing an end to Smith's decade-long spree. Smith's confession gives us a first-hand account of the inner workings of a killer's mind we would not otherwise get. I'll try my best to give you as thorough as possible retelling while not causing unneeded stress. There's no need to be vulgar. At some point in her ride, Fiona nodded off. Smith took this opportunity to take the cab to an out-of-the-way place. He'd used this area several times in the past to be alone with his victims. Before she had any idea of what was going on, Smith had separated her from her phone and quickly locked her into a pair of handcuffs. Smith believed once that was taken care of, Fiona would be at his command. Despite this, she fought her captor. However, a hard knock on the head with a tire iron stopped this. Only then, Smith was truly free to brutalize her at his will. He claims he never actually did anything, but tests of her body prove otherwise. Sometime after the assault, Smith left Fiona alone, still apparently believing her to be unconscious. This is when she took her chance to get away. On this part, I'll have to use a little conjecture. Although she was handcuffed, she must have had some hope that she could find help. The area Smith had taken her to is heavily wooded and remote. From the scratches found in her face, it's thought she'd been running through the woods for a while before she stumbled upon a road. Unfortunately, the road she had discovered sees very little traffic. When a car did finally come along, she waved it down. The bad news was that it was Smith. As soon as he'd noticed her missing, he headed for the main road. He drove up and down for about 30 minutes until he saw her waving at the car. When she realized the situation, it was too late for her. She tried to run back into the woods, but Smith caught her. He was done playing games at that point. After 5 or 6 strikes to the head, she was gone. Her body was left in the woods and wasn't discovered for another 4 days. Before he left her, Smith did his best to build a plausible story. If he was questioned, he could say that he took her home and went on with his life. He had a record of her payment, and his prints wouldn't be on anything she owned. From the outside, he had nothing to hide. Other than the fact that he had given a ride to a couple of the victims, the police had nothing solid against him. In a town with only 3 cab drivers, he was bound to have driven 1 or 2 of the girls. What Smith didn't know at the time was that the police had found a pair of eyeglasses near Fiona's body, and they had traced them back to him. The cops wanted to see if Smith would confess if caught in a compromising position. So, they hid out across from the spot where her body was found and waited. Sure enough, on the second day, they caught him at the dump site searching for his glasses. An hour later, they had their confession. In the following days, he would confess to the other 6 girls' deaths and recount in gory detail how he undertook his crimes. My friend who had originally told me about the case works with the county prosecutor. She says their intent is to go for the death penalty on Fiona's murder, if not all of the victims. She's the reason I have so much inside information about Smith's confession. Owing to her position in town, she is only able to say so much about the case. However, I have no such restrictions on myself. She wanted to make sure our friend's fighting spirit and determination to not go down easily be known by the wider world. Please, rather than remembering the name and horrors that monster committed upon these 7 innocent women, let's celebrate their lives and the way in which they enriched the lives of those they loved. They will all be missed. A few days ago, while doing research for an upcoming book, I came across several photos from an unsolved murder that took place in May of 1954. They portrayed a shocking scene. 2 bodies, 1 male, 1 female was discovered. The male had a single gunshot to the head, the female, a violently mangled skull lacking any nearby blood. The only sign that there was any crime at all was the blood-soaked taxi found almost a mile from the bodies. The aspect of the crime that grabbed my attention and motivated me to take further look was the downright lack of any motive or suspects. Included with the pictures was a story written at the time of the murders and a recent update telling of how the case was being reopened. Although it's beyond cold, the hope is that all the amazing advancements in science can finally be used to solve the case. It's more than likely the individual or individuals involved in the crime are now dead. Regardless of that probability, the loved ones left behind deserve the chance at some form of closure. Since I've been unable to think of anything else, I've dedicated my research time to finding out more about those involved in the crime and the area in which it took place. With a few days of intense study under my belt and a small amount of hindsight, I've formed a theory as to what may have occurred that warm May evening. Before I let you in on my whole little idea, I want to stress that I have come to this conclusion on my own. The new police investigation has no connection to myself, and the law enforcement agencies working the case have no knowledge of my research or existence for that matter. What started as an entertaining bit of reading has become a personal search for the truth and a possible chance at justice. No, I never knew either victim of this long-forgotten horror. It is still no less personal of a journey. The way I see this thing playing out is like so. The male, whose name was Alfred Green, had a record of assaulting women, one being an attempt to force himself on someone, which the charges were later dropped. Green was an employee of the Checker Cab Company. It was his blood-soaked cab found almost a mile away from the two bodies. Considering Green had only the one bullet wound to the head with the average blood pool surrounding the body, I've concluded the massive amount of gore covering the taxi's interior belonged to the female, Anne Hillman. It was said very little blood was found under her body, which only strengthens my belief. Miss Hillman was an assistant librarian and had no criminal record or connection to the crime world. Her friends said she was the stereotypical bookworm. She also had no boyfriend or any romantic entanglements known to anyone at that time. That therefore eliminates the love triangle theory. The last person to see her, Linda Banks, a teller at First National Bank, said that Miss Hillman had mentioned catching a cab back to work. This is where my research of other crimes in the area helps out. Another woman's body had been discovered dumped on the side of the road not far from where this crime took place a month prior. She had been assaulted and beaten to death with a blunt instrument. This likely occurred at another location. With all this information compiled, I've been steered to the following assumptions. I believe Mr. Green and the third unknown subject had joined together to abduct by misleading the victims, taking them to a separate location, and worst of all, doing terrible things to them, and then ending their lives. In this specific case, I believe that after the two men had abducted Miss Hillman, rather than taking her to a separate location, drove to the area the cab was found in. At this location, one of the men, probably Mr. Green, assaulted Miss Hillman. When it came to the act of ending her life, it appears that Mr. Green took it too far and lost control, causing the car to be coated in blood, thus making it a very obvious crime scene that would be difficult to conceal or clean. At this point, Mr. Green's accomplice likely decided he was far too risky of a partner to have. Therefore, after assisting with the dumping of Miss Hillman, the unknown accomplice killed his partner with a gunshot. He more than likely never saw it coming. Once the liability had been eliminated, the partner removed any evidence of his existence from the cab. Now satisfied, no one alive could connect him with the crimes. The unknown third man left the scene. Because of his smart actions at the scene, he remains free all these years later. As I said, this is only a theory. I haven't any new information or facts held back from law enforcement. It's all a result of putting one and one together. This is the only logical way it makes sense to me. Green obviously didn't shoot himself, and there had to be a third person involved. I plan on turning my notes over to the police. Whether they decide to use any of my conclusions is up to them. For the sake of the loved ones left behind, I hope they do. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, do your best to be a good demon and eat your full serving of souls in the morning. In 2015, I was a freshman in college. I roomed with my best friend Emily from high school. Before leaving for college, we had done research and found rumors online that our dorm building was haunted, but we didn't take it seriously. We lived on the second floor, and our room was in between the stairwell and the laundry room. The first month went totally normal, and we were settled into our new routines. One day when I got home from class and walked in the room, everything was open. All the drawers on both of our desks, dressers, and tall standing wardrobes. My first thought was that someone broke into our room and robbed us. But then that didn't make sense because you could only access our room with 2 keycards. One was mine and the other was Emily's. Nobody else's keycards would be able to unlock our door. I called Emily to see if she was in class, but she was in the bathroom down the hall. When she came back, I showed her the room, and she said it wasn't like that when she left. At the time, we both thought it was the other one playing a prank, but neither of us said it. Over the next couple of months, more things started happening that proved to both of us that it wasn't the other one playing pranks. We often came home to everything being open, but that's not it. At night, when we were both in bed, we could hear our laundry baskets being dragged across the floor and things falling off of our shelves. One time, when we were both in our beds with the lights out, I sneezed and clearly heard, "Bless you." When I said thank you, thinking it was Emily, I looked across the room and realized she was asleep. I also heard "hello" whispered in my ear a few times. Another time at night, I was up late studying and Em was asleep. I felt like I was being watched all night, but just told myself I was tired and paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a light shove on my back. Obviously, this scared the life out of me, so I got up to yell at Emily, but then saw she was still in her bed. Once when Emily was in the room by herself, she was on the phone with her dad talking about all the weird stuff that had been happening to us. And of course, right on cue, all at once, every single drawer flew open. After about a month of us being terrified, we got up the courage to talk to our RHD about everything. We started with something like, "So we had a weird question about our room." When she stopped us and said, "Let me guess, stuff is moving around and you don't know why?" "Excuse me? What?" She said every year she gets reports from people that live in that room with stories the same as ours. It's happened for years, she said. She told us that it was the ghost of a little girl named Sarah who was known to be mischievous and liked to mess around. To be honest, this part of the story I'm not sure I buy 100%, but it made us feel a lot better to tell ourselves it was just a girl. After a couple of months, things settled down and occurrences became less frequent. We eventually felt comfortable in our room, and if something happened, we would just tell ourselves it was Sarah messing around again and brushed it off. Even though we were scared at times, we both agreed that nothing ever felt evil or sinister. It did indeed just seem like a mischievous spirit, but either way, we never taunted it or tried to talk to it. I have told this story before in a public setting around 2008. I was living in Louisiana at the time and had called into Coast to Coast AM and told this story to George Norrie, which was a pretty cool experience. I didn't have a whole lot of time to tell some of the details, so you'll be getting the unedited version, so to speak. It happened somewhere between 1997 and 1999. I was in my late teens and we were living in New Mexico up near the Four Corners. My parents were pastors at a local church in a very small town. We had lived outside of town, sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and there were a few houses sprinkled around us. Surrounding us, at least where there were no houses, there was some brush and a lot of desert. Ever since we moved there, the locals told us about skinwalkers. Even people in the church warned us about them. One guy in the church swore up and down that when he was a truck driver, he saw a skinwalker in its human form running alongside his truck when he was going about 80 miles per hour. But since I didn't witness it, I just took him at his word. I had heard many different tales on the origins of skinwalkers, both from the locals and the Native Americans. There was a Native American who went to our church who still held on to his Navajo beliefs, who told me what I always assumed to be a more accurate description. He told me that when people of his tribe had a child out of incest, the tribe leaders take the baby out into the desert to be raised by wolves. The wolves would raise it and they would become skinwalkers, having the powers to turn into anything, animal, human, etc. The story fascinated me. He never seemed to know for sure that this was the accurate tale. Then he warned me to never whistle at night, which I thought was pretty weird, but I never did. Until one night. It was in the fall, around 11 at night. I was in my bedroom, which was the furthest room from anyone in the house and near the garage, watching TV or playing PlayStation. My mother was in her bedroom. My dad was at the church studying, as he always did till around midnight. My brother had a friend over that night, and they were going to spend the night on the back patio, which was a long rectangular room with screen windows all down it. Like I said, I was in my bedroom minding my own business when my brother and his friend came banging on my door. Annoyed, I opened the door, and my brother, who was 4 years younger than me, and his friend are both frightened. My brothers said as they were in the patio goofing off, they heard someone walking around the backyard, and said what looked to be the top of a white bald head walk by the screen windows. Now, normally I would believe my brother, since he would never make this kind of stuff up, but his friend was a huge liar and had told tall tales about having been to Mars, even showing us the red dirt, which looked an awful lot like the red dirt you could find throughout the area, I might add. Of course, by this time I had experienced a lot of paranormal stuff, but I was still skeptical. Bravely and annoyed, I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight, and the three of us went out to the patio. It was always creepy at night because it was always so dark and the only light came from a nearby lamppost a few yards down the street. Our backyard was insanely small except for the right-hand side of it, which was a bit bigger but held a trampoline which took up the better part of it. We stepped out of the patio, my flashlight shining around the yard, but saw nothing. That was when I started hearing the crunching of leaves coming from the front yard. So the three of us went through the back gate to the front yard. Now our front yard was huge and had roughly 9 apple trees. There was even a large creepy tree in the corner of the yard near the street I always stayed clear of for some reason. We had a close neighborhood. Literally on the other side of the wooden fence, it was a nice family that had a daughter about my brother's age, and they also had a bunch of chickens, and sometimes they would wander into our yard, so that is what I thought was walking around our front yard. Shining the flashlight around, of course, I couldn't see any chickens, but I did see something white walk behind a tree near the wooden fence. That was when I got very curious. The three of us walked slowly to the tree. I was being the protective big brother and kept the other two behind me. Before I knew it, I heard a loud whoosh and felt a gust of wind like something flew by us. My brother screamed out in pain. My brother always had his shirt off, which annoyed me because back then I was overweight and very self-conscious, but I noticed on his chest he had 3 long scratches across him. Scared and shocked, my brother ran back inside the house, leaving me and his friend. It all happened so quickly, but I ran towards the street where I was sure whatever it was had gone, his friend close behind me. Once we reached the end of the property, I could hear the sound of bare feet running down the paved road. I shined my light towards the sound, but never saw anything. So I whistled some tune, and from down the road I heard the same tune whistled back to me. Intrigued, I whistled again, this time a different tune, and again the same tune was whistled back. My brother's friends started getting scared and kept trying to get me to go back inside, but I was very intrigued. I whistled for the third time, and that was when, very close by, we both heard a male voice say, "Hey kid, come here." And there was no hesitation. The two of us bolted back inside. We went to go tell my mother what happened, and she was already frightened because she was tending to my brother's scratches on his chest. We told her what happened, and my mother told us to stay inside. My mother has had some pretty scary paranormal encounters before. I need to tell those stories soon as well, and she believed us. I have never forgotten that encounter. My brother brushes it off these days, making it out to be not a big deal, but I know differently, as does my mother. It's one of the few incidents in my life that literally bothers me to this day. First, some information about my great-grandmother. She was born to immigrant parents in 1911 and passed away at the age of 94. Her father was an Englishman and her mother was from Luxembourg. Most of her family spoke German as well as English. However, great-grandma only knew a little German. Gigi's mother only spoke German and was almost completely deaf. Gigi relied on either her sisters to translate the mangled German or a crude family sign language they had developed. Gigi grew up in rural North Dakota, and to frame the time period, she once told me about how when she was a little girl, her family would regularly barter with the members of the Mandan tribe, whom she described as real Indians, not like today. She also only attended the local school till about 6th grade. Later in life, she was not particularly bright, but not dumb. She was religious, but not a Bible thumper, the type of woman who would give you a religious birthday card and a Ninja Turtle action figure, who had a picture of Jesus but never said grace. The one thing she was always very serious about was how she met the devil. Gigi would tell the story when prompted, but she never seemed to enjoy it and was always consistent in her description. When she was 10 years old, she was misbehaving. Her father wasn't home, and her mother again didn't speak English. Her mother attempted to control her, but Gigi just ignored her. Finally, her mother tried to grab a hold of her, but Gigi flailed and almost hit her mother. Gigi's mother caught Gigi's hand and looked her cold in the eyes. She let her go and pointed at the closet and left the room. Gigi and her siblings were often sent to the closet as some sort of timeout, and she knew she had messed up, so she went to accept her punishment. When she opened the door, however, something was inside. She said the being had hooves and was covered in dark fur which subsided a bit on the torso and chest up to the face. The being had a man's face with dark eyes, an unkempt beard, and a mop of dirty black hair, and from only one side of its head rose a deer antler. Gigi said that being stepped forward slightly before she slammed the closet door shut. She shrieked, and her mother came to see what the commotion was. She could only really cry and wave her arms, but her mother opened the closet door anyway, and it was gone. She was always very serious about that story, and admittedly writing it even now makes me feel off somehow. That's the story of how my great-grandmother met the devil. However, she also said that aliens gave her a stroke. A few years before she died, Gigi had a number of strokes. She was in her 90s at the time. The first was not debilitating, it just took some time to recover. Some more quick info. Her and her husband, my great-grandfather, adored fast food. They had to substance hunt during the Depression to feed their children, so they marveled at good fast food. Great-grandpa loved McDonald's, but Gigi loved pizza, specifically Godfather's Pizza. After she had mostly recovered from her stroke, my family took my great-grandparents to Godfather's as a kind of celebration. But being a dumb kid, I got a bunch of quarters from my dad for arcade games and ignored my nonagenarian great-grandparents. To this day, I regret not spending more time with them. I had an odd number of quarters after the games, and the restaurant had one of those little toy dispensers, the ones with plastic egg things. I bought one with my last quarter, and it was a tiny plastic alien giving a peace sign. Done with the games, I returned to the table. I was fiddling with the alien, classic gray-looking, and Gigi noticed. When I set the alien down, Gigi took it and inspected it closely. With everyone at the table, she held up the alien and looked at me and said, "Them's the thing that come and got me." My mom, half laughing, said, "What, Grandma?" Gigi repeated herself, and then said they were the reason she was in the hospital. When my grandfather, Gigi's son-in-law, told her she was in the hospital because of a stroke, she said, "Them things gave me the stroke." The family sort of stopped pressing at this point and things settled down. Most of my family chalked it up to a joke or her stroke. I don't buy it as a joke. Gigi was sweet, but not a joker. Furthermore, I don't think she knew what a gray alien was. She hadn't seen a movie since the 1950s, she didn't watch TV, and she only really read the newspaper. She mostly did crafts and listened to music in her spare time. As for it being a stroke hallucination, maybe, but it's still weird. So this event happened approximately a week ago. I was going to post then, but I wanted to let this digest a bit and not post on a knee-jerk reaction. I'm a police officer in a city of about 30,000 people. I am currently assigned to our midnight shift, working the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At the beginning of my shift, I am called to a house in what can be described as the wealthiest part of town. I am told by dispatch that the resident of the house, a teenage girl, believes that an adult male is attempting to enter the home. I activated my lights and sirens and arrived at the home at a short time later. I knock on the door and make contact with the caller, a frantic 18-year-old girl. My sergeant arrives, on scene a short time later. I ask her to describe what happened. She explains that while laying on the couch she heard pounding on the front door. She then looked out the peep and did not see anyone. She then heard banging on the back sliding glass door and screaming coming from outside. Again, she didn't see anyone. We ask if anyone made entry into the home. The complainant denies this. My sergeant and I check the area, finding no footprints in the yard. We also check the dew in the grass, finding it to be undisturbed. We also checked the glass for fingerprints and were unable to locate any. We chalked it up to this girl's friends playing a prank on her or her having an overactive imagination and leave the house. Approximately 3 hours later, we are called back to the residence. We are notified that the female believes someone to be inside the home this time. I beat my partner to the house by approximately 3 to 4 minutes. I enter and begin speaking with the complainant, who is visibly shaken. I am told that she was awoken by more banging and a man saying, "I know you are in here." The complainant states that she had barricaded the basement door with a chair, as she believes someone could easily enter the home through the attached garage. I tell her to stay put in the living room and go to search the basement garage. I draw my firearm and search the basement. During my search, I feel very uneasy, as if though I'm being watched. I complete my search as my partner arrives. I walk back upstairs and meet with her and tell her that I haven't cleared the rest of the home yet. She draws her weapon and helps me search the rest of the home. The last room we enter belongs to the complainant, and it's her bedroom. Inside the bedroom, we find a Ouija board to be in plain view. We deem the residence safe and go back to the living room. At this point, the complainant is frantically shaking and crying. We ask if she lives alone. She states that she stays with her grandparents. She also states that they are out of town on business. She states that she is frequently home alone due to her grandparents being out of town on business. I ask her to call and speak with her grandpa. I speak with him and learn that the complainant does not have any mental health issues, nor any behavioral issues. The complainant also does not use any form of drugs that he knows of besides nicotine. The grandpa states he is going to call another family member to come look after the complainant. We speak with the complainant again, learning that she does not currently suffer from mental illnesses. The complainant admits to smoking recreationally occasionally, but not partaking on any of the night of the disturbance. The complainant also advised us that she found the Ouija board that day hidden in a closet of the home. Her condition further degraded, and she requested that we take her somewhere else. My partner, being a female officer, transported the complainant back to our HQ, where she was picked up by a family member at a later time. I stayed at the home and searched the surrounding area again. I again did not locate any signs of a person being outside the home. I don't know if this is the right place to post this, but I believe this girl may have experienced something. I for sure did not feel good whilst being in that basement. I used to be a huge skeptic of the paranormal until I took this job. However, I have experienced and dealt with multiple things that I couldn't explain in regards to calls to service. My partner also stated to feel very uneasy while being in the house. Anyone thinks she may have stumbled across something, or did we just feed into the paranoia of a young girl who was home alone? Unfortunately, I have not been called out to the home ever since, so I haven't gotten to investigate into this occurrence any further. So this first story took place when I was around the age of 7. I vividly remember me and my twin brother were just playing around in our backyard like little kids do. I remember we were sitting on the ground and playing around one of those heavy parasol things, which had no parasol in it. Eventually, me and my brother both sat around the parasol stand, just playing with some little toy cars or something. This is the moment me and my brother both saw a pale hand coming out of the hole on the top. Me, being the curious kid I was, touched the hand, and I remember it felt very cold. Eventually the hand just slid back into the parasol stand, and we weren't really freaked out for some reason. We calmly explained to our mom what had happened, and obviously she just played it off like it was just our imagination. To this day, around 15 years later, me and my brother both swear to God we both saw that hand. The second story is about me having really weird night terrors when I was younger. So I would say I was around the age of 5 when this story took place, and I remember it would happen almost every other night. So I would be laying in bed, sound asleep, and all of a sudden I would just randomly wake up in the middle of the night. I'm guessing this would be around 2 to 3 a.m. As my eyes got adjusted to the dark, I would start to look around my room, wondering what woke me up. Eventually, once my eyes had fully adjusted to the dark, I would see this pale hand coming out of my wall, which would be coming towards me, trying to touch me. This would happen so frequently that I just got used to it and would just leave my room for about half an hour, and then I would come back and go back to sleep. The strange thing is, the wall the hand was coming from was one of the outer walls of our house on the second floor, so nobody should have been able to get to me, even if there was a hole in that wall, which wasn't the case, obviously. Also, the fact that I always woke up before this happened makes it impossible to write off as a bad dream. It also wasn't sleep paralysis because I was able to look around, move my arms and legs, and I could also get up. Fast forward to a few years later, and we found out our house was built almost on top of a historic burial site, where a famous murderer from the 1700s was presumably buried. I did some research on this criminal, and he did not have a happy ending. According to a diary from someone who witnessed his execution back in 1775, he was strapped down in a chair for 114 consecutive days before he was brutally executed. Was it just my childhood imagination, or was it the criminal trying to make one more victim from the grave? I used to work at a diner in Spanish Fork, Utah. It is a small diner, but pretty active with ghosts. The first experience I heard about was when a coworker of mine, Mia, had something thrown at her. I was present when this happened, but had my back turned on her, so I didn't see it directly. I just suddenly heard Mia and my manager yelling in shock. I asked what happened, and Mia said, "I was just printing labels and the container fell and hit my thigh." I know layouts are normally useless, but I believe a layout explanation is necessary here so you understand why we were all so shocked. Mia was standing at the computer, which we had in the server's aisle. It was an open restaurant, so the only thing separating the server's aisle was a bar. To the left of the bar was a little closed-in section with hot sauce and other condiments, ice, and iced tea and coffee in their respective brewers. The iced tea brewer was at the far left, closest to the wall. The computer was in a cart in front of the brewer. This is where Mia was standing, printing labels. On top of the iced tea brewer was the brew funnel. The brew funnel was what ended up hitting Mia on her thigh. It's important to mention, though, that it was pretty far back, so it couldn't have just fallen. And even if it did, it wouldn't have hit Mia's thigh. It would have just fallen straight down. Our manager said that it looked like someone swiped it off the iced tea brewer, but gravity ultimately won, and instead of hitting Mia on the head, it was on a path to hit her on the head. It hit her on her thigh. After that, Mia and I spent a lot of time talking about how haunted the diner is. She had been there since it opened, so she told me a lot of stories that I wasn't aware of before. She said that scissors, knives, and other dangerous and/or heavy objects had been thrown at the employees. She also shared the theory that the reason why businesses located at that building never made it past 5 years was because it was on cursed ground. Spanish Fork is one of the locations where a war between Native Americans and Mormon settlers took place, so I believed it. I asked her if anyone had died at the restaurant, and she said, "Yes, some construction workers died." After hearing that, I thought I'd ask more of my coworkers, and well, it wasn't in vain, to say the least. Another coworker, Madison, told me about the time she had an experience. She told me she had gone to the bathroom, and while she was doing her business, she heard someone coming in and going into the handicap stall. Madison finished and went over to wash her hands, but she noticed that the handicap stall door was ajar. When she finished washing her hands, she checked the stall, and to her surprise, no one was there. She said the person was particularly loud when they first went into the bathroom, so Madison found it weird that she didn't hear the person getting out. After returning to the server's aisle, it dawned on her that the restaurant was empty as the rush had been over, and her and the other servers were cleaning up for the next shift. Then I talked to Madison's brother, Caden, who was a graveyard cook at the time. He said that he had seen 2 different apparitions while working that shift. The first one was when he saw someone walking to the dry storage room. He thought it was the server he was working with, Taya, so he went to see if she needed help. Layout of the back house, dish room to the left, then manager's office adjacent to the dish room. The kitchen was to the right, and behind the kitchen was the walk-in and freezer. Behind the dish room was the dry storage room. When he reached the dish room, he saw that no one was there, so he thought maybe Taya had gone to the walk-in. He checked, and she wasn't there. He checked the dish room, and nothing, so he went out to the front of the house. To his surprise, she was clear in the back, taking drinks to a table, so there's no way she would have been able to go to the back of the house, fill the cups, and take the drinks to said table in the time it took Caden to check the back. The next one happened a few weeks after that. He was cleaning the kitchen and just trying to make time go by as it had been a slower night. He looked up and saw a little boy running towards the door to exit the restaurant. Caden later told Taya, "What kind of parent would bring their child to a restaurant at 3 a.m.? Taya was clearly confused and told him that she hadn't served any tables with kids that whole night. The next stories happened to me. I was taking a table's order one day and saw someone walking behind me. It distracted me and I looked behind me, but there was no one there. I looked to where the bathrooms were because I thought maybe that's where the person was headed, but there was no one there either. The only person who was near me, other than the people at my table, was my coworker Lauren. She was to the left of me setting tables, so she couldn't have been the one who walked behind me to go to the bathrooms, which were to the right. I know someone walked behind me. I saw it, but I also felt it. You know those vibrations you feel when someone walks near you? I felt that, and the wind that comes after someone walks by you. I've seen shadow figures all over the place. One was even charging towards me. I've seen chairs moving, and my name has been said by disembodied voices. One time, a child ghost, maybe the same one Caden saw, dropped my tray full of cups of water. All of them broke, and I got wet. I know it was a ghost because there was no way that tray could have fallen, but I also heard a child laughing after the tray fell. Not only that, but I also felt the presence of a younger spirit. Needless to say, that diner is definitely haunted by several spirits. Some seem angry at us, whereas others seem like troublemakers or even lost souls. I'm a 28-year-old female. I currently work as a cardiac monitor technician in a hospital 30 minutes south of a major city. The hospital is actually relatively new. It opened independently in the early 90s, but by the year 2000, it was bought by a Catholic organization, and the sisters completely changed the way the hospital was run. For those who don't know, hospitals who are trauma certified are qualified and governed by state laws. The level qualifications vary from state to state, but just know that level 1 trauma is the most severe. We're talking gunshot wounds, motor vehicle crashes, stabbings, basically the worst of the worst emergencies. The level designation is in place to determine where patients who are being brought in by ambulance should go depending on the severity of the situation. This is all relevant, as my hospital used to be a level 1 trauma center in the 2000s, but to put it bluntly, there is no money to be made in trauma work. These patients often have little to no insurance and cannot pay, or they don't make it. Therefore, it was decided by corporate that we would no longer offer trauma services, and severe cases would have to be airlifted out to the nearest trauma center. As in any hospital, there is always death, both expected and unexpected. Not as much as you think, really. I mean, it's not like there's a death every day, but they do happen, and it's always a sobering thing, be it expected or not, at least for me. Because this used to be a trauma center, there were many, many more tragic cases and a lot more deaths back in those days. Sudden and unexpected deaths often ended in hauntings, and frankly, I believe that after what I experienced on this night. When I was new here several years ago, I got onto the topic of ghosts and the paranormal with a nurse I was working with at the time. I'll call her Nicole, as I truly believe my apartment back then was haunted. That's a story for another time. When I brought this up, she asked if I'd ever heard of the little girl with no face who haunts this big long hallway that connects the whole hospital, which we call the spine. I said, no, I haven't. Nicole went on to explain, well, supposedly she died when this place still took trauma cases. The rumor is that she was shot in a drive-by on her way to school and bled out and died in the ER before her parents got there, because she'd come in by ambulance. It's probably nonsense, I don't know. I don't know why she shows up in the spine, but a lot of people have seen her down there, and when they see her, she's got a long white dress on, and no one can see her face. It's always a solid little girl with all the right features except all white and no eyes, no mouth, no nose. On the occasions where people have seen her, a patient goes on to die that night. It always seems to line up. I was pretty dumbfounded by this. For one or two people to see a ghost is unlikely, but for multiple people to give accounts of the same thing, plus documented deaths, there must be something behind it, right? It was about a year later that I had my own experience, and it made me 100% a believer for life. I worked the overnight shift 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and since it's 12 hours, we always take a few breaks to get out of the room we sit in to watch the heart monitors. It's basically a broom closet, tiny, cramped, and hot, so I'm always happy to get out. I had gone into the break room, which is on the other end of my unit, and on that end to the right is a set of double doors leading into the spine. I walk into the break room, microwave my lunch, and sit there, enjoying the peace and quiet while eating my food. Once I'm done, I open the door to head back to my station when, out of the corner of my eye, I see someone standing in the spine. This is unusual as it's not a hallway the employees use at night. In fact, those doors are usually kept closed and no one is supposed to be out there, so this person immediately caught my attention. I turn to fully look at them and, I kid you not, there she is. All white, long flowing white gown, and no face. She has no facial features whatsoever, but she is facing me. As I froze and stared at her, I couldn't help but notice she wasn't actually touching the ground. The bottom of her dress was about 5 or 6 inches off the floor, like she was hovering. I felt a bad presence. In healthcare, you tend to go with your intuition or gut instincts about people and situations because sometimes it's all you have. As she stood there in front of me, I got this horrible, gut-churning feeling. A feeling like she had bad intentions, like she wanted to do harm. I don't know. Either way, it wasn't a pleasant feeling. It was one of those feelings where you feel like your heart dropped into your stomach. All the hairs in my entire body stand up and a shiver runs down my back as I stood there, maybe 20 feet away from this little girl, and my mind went absolutely blank as to what I should do. Do I acknowledge her? Do I just keep walking and pretend I didn't see her? I have no idea. At this point, I'm in such shock that I don't think I've gotten a word out anyway. My mouth was clenched shut. Just as I am questioning what I should do, she begins to change shape into what I can only describe as a mist or smoke, and moves quickly to the left side of the hallway and disappears just like that. As this happens, an ice-cold breeze wafts into me. I begin to internally freak out and quickly begin to speed walk back to the monitoring room, wondering what I had just witnessed. The best part is, the charge nurse relieving me for the break is the very same nurse who told me about the girl in the first place. As I return to the monitors, Nicole clearly notices I'm freaked out and shaken a little. Maybe I actually look like I saw a ghost, as they say. Nicole asks me what happened and I explain to her everything that I saw, and she begins to freak out a little too. She says, "I wonder if someone's going to die tonight then." I'd completely forgotten about that part of the rumor, and now I begin to freak out even more. If someone did start dying, I'd be the first to know since I'm watching every patient's heart on the 3 computer monitors in front of me. It's hard to explain, but if someone is on the verge of death, there are obvious signs I look for. Coincidences do happen, of course, and as it happens, I did have a patient who was actually right across the hall from the room where I sit who was not doing well at all. Nicole's patient, he'd been in that room for approximately 2 weeks by then. He was terminally ill as it was. Lung cancer had metastasized and spread to his whole body, including his bones. Small cell lung cancer is very aggressive. Nothing to be done except manage the pain. I can't even begin to imagine the pain he must have been in. This poor man actually began to beg for death as the night dragged on, which made me wonder if the girl was perhaps an angel of mercy instead of something purely evil, because he got his wish. He was what is called a DNR. Do not resuscitate, meaning no life-saving measures. If he begins to die, then he dies. We do exactly nothing except make them comfortable. Given his sorry state and the amount of pain he was experiencing, if the girl was responsible, his last breath was truly a mercy. Listening to someone begging God to kill them and make all the pain stop is so gut-wrenching and heartbreaking. He did eventually begin to pass out at 3 a.m. I saw it start happening on the monitor. His heart rate just got slower and slower and slower, until there was nothing but a flat line. It's usually a somber thing, but I was actually grateful. He got what he wanted, and his pain was over. In the end, it would appear the rumor is true. The faceless girl in white appeared, and within a few hours, a patient passed away. Could be a coincidence, of course, but I find that highly unlikely. I think maybe she really is an angel of mercy, waiting for someone who is critically ill, willing or wants to go, and helping them pass on. Maybe that's why she sometimes appears before someone dies. It isn't that she maliciously is causing the deaths, but rather holding a sick person's hand as they cross to the other side. Maybe she facilitates that journey. Perhaps that's why I had the reaction to her that I did, and got that sick feeling that something bad was about to happen. But what may seem like something bad can actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise. At least, that's what I'd like to believe. I've been hearing and reading a lot lately about people having crazy experiences with shadow figures. I don't know why. Has there been an influx or something? And every time I do, I think of the experience I had with one when I was 13, about 8 years ago now. Back then, I had just gotten a loft bed, the black wooden one from IKEA to be specific. Every night when I go to sleep, I'd keep the TV on, which sat on my dresser across from the bed because the noise would lull me to sleep. Well, that night the noise and the light was keeping me up, thanks radiation, so I decided to turn it off. When I did, my bedroom was pitch black, my door was closed, I didn't have any night lights, and no other devices were on. I rolled over onto my side, facing towards the wall, and closed my eyes. A few minutes went by and I was still wide awake. I was beginning to get frustrated because I still couldn't fall asleep. Just as I was thinking about this, I got the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. You know how you can just tell when someone's walked into the room, almost like the energy or density changes? Well, I had an older sister who had a habit of creeping into my room late at night to steal my stuff, so I thought, okay, it's just Hannah getting something. But when I opened my eyes, my room was still dark. This told me it wasn't her because whenever she'd come in, she'd leave the door open a crack and the hallway light would shine through. Plus, she's incredibly loud, although she tried her best to be as quiet as to not wake me up, but my room was absolutely silent. As soon as this realization dawned on me, an overwhelming sense of dread came over me. I knew someone was in the room with me, just as I know my own name, but since the human mind needs tangible proof of everything, I decided to check just in case I was imagining it. If you know anything about loft beds, you know those things are loud when you move, since you're basically propped up on stilts in the air. So as I moved, I tried to do so as quietly as possible so that whatever was in the room with me wasn't aware I was there, and knew it was there too. When I finally reached the slats and looked down through them, sure enough, there was this black figure in the shape of a person standing in front of my dresser. I straight up knew whatever this thing was, it was evil because A, malevolence practically oozed from it and spread over my bedroom, and B, this thing was literally blacker than the darkness of my bedroom. Like imagine being in a pitch black room, then a figure materializes, no tangible features, just a straight up filled in outline in the shape of a person that is darker than the dark. That's what this thing was. I don't know how, but as soon as I laid my eyes on this thing, I saw it turn its head and look at me. Again, it didn't have any features, so I didn't physically see its eyes looking at me, but it's almost like I could see it, feel it in my mind. It paralyzed me. Then it began moving and walking towards my ladder like it was going to climb up. I shot straight up in terror, knowing that if this thing got to me, something bad was sure to happen, and reached out my arm to turn on my ceiling fan light. Luckily, it was literally less than a foot away from where I was. I yelled out the guardian angel prayer as fast as I could, and my mouth stumbled over the words in my haste, and as soon as I finished, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace and love come over me like I've never felt before, as if something was there protecting me. When that feeling came, all sense of darkness and negativity just shattered. I was so calm and at peace, almost like I'd taken a Xanax, although I didn't know what that feeling was until years later. Insert punchline drum sound. That I just flicked the light back off and instantly fell asleep. I haven't seen a shadow person since, but I do feel people or things standing near my bed at night all the time. It'll wake me up, but I'll never see anything. Whenever I feel like I'm not alone, I'll imagine a white light surrounding me and emanating from my body and tell whatever it is in my mind that it's not welcome and must leave. Works every single time without fail, but the experience I had when I was 13 terrified me, and I hope it never happens again. My cousin and I have always been very close and very spiritual. Though we've always viewed our spirituality in different ways, we have always believed in ghosts. That was one of the many common threads that we talked about openly and frequently, especially when we figured out that not everyone believed in ghosts as well. About a decade ago, we were teenagers. My cousin and I lived across the country from one another. The separation in our spiritual perspectives was growing larger every time we spoke. He was very fascinated by demons and the macabre aspects of good versus evil. If he tried to fraternize with spirits, he aimed to hunt down demons or create an environment for them to be more likely to be present. That included carving pentagrams into any surface he could find, or basically just inviting these things around. I, on the other hand, didn't see any need to talk with demons. Human spirits and natural forces are far more interesting. I spent a lot of time meditating and trying to interact with any spirit I came across that didn't feel malignant. I like to think of myself as sensitive, but I'm not a full-on medium. I am open to those interactions, and I trust my gut as much as possible. I found a kindred spirit in a friend that I met at school, Clara. We became fast friends, and before long I found out that she believed in ghosts too. Her experiences tended to be a bit more traumatizing than my own, but she liked the kinder side of spirits and physically felt ill any time she encountered a bad spirit. My cousin found a friend that believed in the paranormal as well. He introduced this friend to me, and after a while we started a long-distance relationship. I didn't know his feelings about ghosts, but I knew that if he was hanging out with Anthony, he probably had a feel for the macabre. Eventually, the time finally came that I could take my best friend up to see my family. I was very excited to get her up there. I wanted her to see the place that I have always considered to be my home, and I wanted her to get to know my cousin. He was like a brother to me, and it turned out she developed a little crush on him from my stories about him, chats, and pictures. I was also happy that I could finally hang out with my then-boyfriend in person. At some point, I told Anthony that Clara is sensitive like us. He seemed vaguely interested and mentioned that Ray, the guy I was seeing, was also sensitive. I thought that was neat and left it at that. Anthony had other plans. At the first opportunity he could find, Anthony suggested the four of us go for a walk, right as the sun was setting. He wanted to go to the park that was across the street from his apartment complex. It was a large wooded area with a winding walking path around a small lake. It was pretty nice. It had a playground for little kids, gazebos, and a handful of benches. There was a bridge or two over some wide streams. The park was lovely, and I was enthusiastic about going to it. Clara seemed happy to go, and Ray didn't have to be asked twice. It was only once we were outside and away from the adults that Anthony said that it was haunted. Clara seemed a little tense, but we went anyway. The air was a little brisk, and leaves crunched under our feet. There was a couple mounds of snow here and there, but nothing major. We could see the sunset through the tree branches, and we were all talking and laughing. At first, Ray would not stop touching me. It was a little awkward because my cousin and best friend were right there, but when Anthony walked ahead of us, Ray followed. It was a relief to hang back and talk to Clara. Once we were in the park, just past the playground, Anthony took us to the edge of the lake next to the walking path. We looked across the water, and Anthony told Clara about the ghost that he suspected was in the woods. Anthony hinted that he thought the spirit was evil, and Ray said that it looked just like his grandpa. I wasn't buying it. From where we were standing, everything just felt right. It was calm and serene. The breeze felt nice, and that crisp autumn air was intoxicating. I opened up my senses further, but I still didn't feel anything wrong. When it was time to start down the path, I drifted ahead of everyone. I could tell they were tense and a little freaked out, and I didn't want to get mixed up in it. I was on cloud 9. That is, at least until we took about a dozen steps into the wooded area. All of a sudden, I didn't feel safe being so far ahead and chalked it up to feeling guilty about not walking with my friends and family. I hung back until I was walking with them. It did not take long for Anthony to take the lead. Clara did not seem pleased to be taking that path, so I stayed close to her. Ray went from Anthony to me and back again. He was smiling, happy. Anthony walked with determination. The further we walked, the less eager and pleasant Ray became. By the time we crested the highest hill in the park, he was positively despondent. Meanwhile, Clara started asking if we could head back. I told her we were at the halfway point, and she was thoroughly unimpressed with that response. All the while, Anthony trudged on ahead. At the bottom of the hill, Clara needed to stop. Anthony came back to us, and Ray went to the nearest tree to peer into the dark that had settled around us. I wanted to keep going. There was a prickling feeling against my skin, and I felt very uncomfortable where we were. The trees were thick enough to block out the rest of the world, and it was legitimately dark out, but I kept my mouth shut. We only had a little further to go. I don't remember what scared everyone. Forgive me, but it was a decade ago, and I have a blank spot in my memory here. I remember that we stopped, and we were all nervous. The next memory I have is of Clara saying that she felt sick and either crying or about to. Ray was slowly creeping his way into the trees, away from the path. Most of all, I remember Anthony's panicked eyes and a look that just screamed, "What do I do?" Anthony has been the leader since before we could walk. He talks a big game and he makes the rules. He has always been the boss, and he looked at me for help. Something in me clicked as soon as I saw that look in his eyes. Immediately, I told him, "Get Clara out of here. I'll get Ray." For once, Anthony didn't argue. Usually any bossy tone from me earned a quip or a fight, but he didn't even say anything back to me. He went straight to Clara and walked her back down the path. All the while, he kept a protective arm around her shoulders. They left and I was stuck with Ray. For a second, I didn't know what to do. Ray was stronger than me, so I couldn't pull him out. He wouldn't look at me, and he kept muttering something about his grandpa and going somewhere. He kept trying to walk into the trees, and I begged him not to go. He responded by wrapping his arms around a skinny sapling and staring off into the dark. I tried to pull him away, but he wouldn't budge. His muscles tensed and his brow furrowed when I touched him. In that moment, I was scared he would hit me, so I let him go. I pressed close to the nearest tree and tried to think of how I could convince him to leave. I guess I thought that whatever spirit he was connected with or wanted to connect with was what was keeping him there. I reasoned that the only way I was going to get him to come along was if I opened myself up spiritually and tried to take some pressure off of him. If that meant getting some attention from whatever was there or pushing it away, I wasn't sure. I just felt that I had to try. I mentally envisioned letting all my guards down. For a second, I felt all right. I was annoyed with Ray and I wanted to leave, but I was okay. I thought about grabbing him again, but didn't get a chance when I felt like all the air in my lungs whooshed out of my body. The world was suddenly a blur, and I felt myself being pulled through the trees by a force I couldn't see. I remember everything was heavily laden with snow. Every branch I passed was on the verge of snapping from the weight, and the ground ahead of me didn't have a single track or footprint. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't breathe. Finally, I was halted at the bottom of a tree. Above me, a dark shadow stared down. It looked like the outline of a very large, rotund monkey with a lion mane. It screamed out this grotesque, pig-like squealing laugh at me. I knew it was laughing at me, and that scared me all the more. I was on the verge of tears, and I felt myself rocket back to my body like a slingshot. I heaved in air, and my eyes stung with tears. My body shook all over, and that laugh just would not stop replaying in my head. Ray didn't even look at me as I struggled to regain my senses. We had to leave. We were not safe, and Ray wouldn't move. I looked back up the hill and saw the outline of a tall man next to something short. I couldn't figure out what the short thing was and decided it was a bench. I glanced at Ray and asked, "Do you see that?" He didn't even look. When I returned my gaze to the hill, I couldn't find the man again. Fed up, I grabbed Ray's sleeve and hauled him the best that I could onto the path. I just kept saying, "We have to go. We have to leave. Anthony and Clara already left." The more I talked to him and pulled, the more Ray tried to pull away. He was still talking about his grandpa. He wouldn't go with me until I yelled at him, "That thing is obviously not your grandpa. We're going." Slowly he followed. I refused to go up that hill, so we finished the rest of the walking path. I helped Ray along until he started acting like himself again. The further we got, the more jovial he became. It was a little disturbing, and I was still shaken up by what I experienced. I have had out-of-body experiences before, but nothing as awful as that. By the time we reached the nearest gazebo, Ray was talkative and laughing. I wasn't listening. I just wanted out. I felt a lot better when Anthony met us at the playground. Clara wasn't with him. He was worried about us and said he couldn't leave us alone out there. Anthony took us to Clara. She was in the stairwell of the nearest apartment building, the one Ray lived in. Anthony knew the code because he and Ray were best friends. Clara had thrown up quite a bit. She wanted to go back to the apartment, and she didn't want to go in those woods ever again. She was really shaken up, and I was worried about her because she actually vomited. We walked back, and the boys were in high spirits. We were not. Clara and I told my aunt what happened in private, and she didn't seem surprised. She said that Anthony and Ray had been carving pentagrams into the gazebo out there, and she suspected that they were trying to summon something. She told them multiple times that they shouldn't do that, but they weren't the type to listen. Later, Anthony admitted that he took us out there because he wanted to test Clara. He wanted to know if she really was sensitive. He didn't seem to regret it in the slightest. He also let me know that there isn't a bench at the crest of the hill we were at when I told him what happened to me and Ray. I think all of our true colors shone that day, and I still get chills when I think about what I saw. My mother shared this story with me. Her and her friend, who shall remain nameless, were traveling after work from Great Falls, Montana for a camping trip at Holland Lake. The sky was darkened more than usual with impending storm clouds. Along the way, they had found themselves inadvertently sandwiched in a 3-semi convoy heading down the highway doing 55. As my mom and her friend passed Lincoln, Montana, a heavy downpour began, severely limiting their already limited field of vision. It was at this point that my mom and her friend were surprised when the passenger window completely dropped, in such a way that they were lucky the window didn't break. My mom and her friend looked at the now completely open window. There, they saw a figure that was hovering next to their open window, moving 55 miles per hour along with the vehicle. None of the semis seemed to react to this. My mom described the figure, of which she could only see the head and shoulders, as a man wearing a World War-era gas mask. They immediately pulled over at a bar in Clearwater Junction where they received a free shot each, the bartender commenting that they both looked like they just saw a ghost. Fast forward to 1987. My mom comes across the just-released Communion by Whitley Strieber and immediately freaks out. She shows the picture to her friend. The first thing her friend did was scream, and they yell at my mother to never, ever bring the incident up again. My dad always worked away fitting floors. One day he got offered a pretty big job in Malta, a remote small island near Italy. The pay was great, so we told him to go for it, but didn't expect him to be working away for so long. Weeks had gone by and my dad hadn't finished yet, so my mom suggested me and my sister catch a flight for the weekend to go and see him. I was really excited too, having a relaxing weekend away to see my dad, only that's not how it ended. When we got there, we were staying in a small apartment house with 3 floors. However, the top floor was run down and abandoned. The apartment was quite large and had 3 rooms. My mom stayed with my dad and I chose the room before my sister, so she went to look at her room. She came out in shock and fear, and I said, "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," I joked. "I want to sleep with you. There's a weird baby's cot in my room." I said okay and didn't think anything of it. Later that evening, we went for some food and drinks. We got back and were quite tired and jet-lagged, so we headed to sleep. As me and my sister were trying to sleep, we heard noises coming from the room above us and the sound of footsteps and furniture being moved around. This was weird too, because the room was abandoned. "Did you hear that?" my sister said. I was thinking it was my imagination, but when my sister said that, I began to panic a bit. "It's probably just the wind or something. Let's just go back to sleep," I said and brushed it off to the side. I got up and closed the door before heading off to sleep. Around 4 a.m., I woke up to a cold breeze, and I opened my eyes to see the door wide open. I looked back at my sister and said, "Did you open that?" She moaned no and rolled over. I rolled my eyes and turned back to the door, and my eyes took a shock as I saw an old lady standing in the doorway with long black hair, an old sleeping gown that they would wear in Victorian times. I couldn't think, so I rolled over and closed my eyes, praying it was my imagination. The next day was our last night there, and we went for food and explored the island. When we got home, we watched a few films and went to sleep. I had no problem sleeping that night, however, I still heard the footsteps in the room above. The next day, we were heading home to the airport at about 3 a.m. When we got to the airport, my sister stopped me, and what she said next sent shivers down my spine, and every hair stood up on my body. "I didn't want to tell you this until we had left, but last night when you were asleep, I woke up and saw a child watching you sleep. A little boy around the age of one that would use the cot in the other room. I closed my eyes straight away and hoped it wasn't real." My mouth just fell open. "So I'm not going crazy then?" I said to her. She shook her head in fear. "Well, at least it's over. I just feel sorry for poor Dad. He seemed to find it fine over there." I was getting ready to board the plane and wanted a book to read, so I headed to a shop to look for one. I was looking for about 5 minutes and then turned around and saw one side of the bookstore covered in books called The Ghosts of Malta. I was intrigued and decided to look at one. I got seated on the plane and then opened the book and felt a tear of fear run down my face when reading this. I was staying in a little town called Valencia, and I saw the town's name pop up on the book, and this made me drop all belief I was being crazy, and I knew what happened back there wasn't normal. It read, "Valencia is a well-known town in Malta for the haunting of an old lady and her son watching people at night." I couldn't believe what I was reading, and decided to bin it as soon as I got home. I don't know what happened when I was in Malta, but I knew I would never be returning. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data. Located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And don't forget to clap them almond bobbies.
Get on. I can take you anywhere. I'm not going to hurt you. Where would you like to go? If you don't decide, I will. Like I've done to so many others.
Ladies and gentlemen, future historians will look back on this day as the beginning of a new era. Since the 1943 phenomenon, the world as we know it has been plagued with an immaterial, cerebral electricity. Ghost stories and myths became no longer superstitions, but a horrifying reality that we've been forced to recognize. We have since learned that this electricity was not a foreign substance. it had simply revealed itself for us to observe, to understand. Through the combined efforts of brilliant scientists, engineers, backed by many nations and corporate sponsors, we have finally been able to shine light into this darkness. As CEO of Greetings Robotics Corporation, it is my pleasure, my honor, to present to you Cammy Generation 1.
Thanks for the lift. I'm so used to spaghettification as my method of transportation that I forgot what it was like to be human. What a familiar feeling. The restrictiveness of the human body. To see through your eyes, the world around you still looks no different to me, but it's what you desire that brought you here, and these are the things I'm blind to. I know when something is obstructing your way. Someone's coming! I'm a beautiful sunflower.
My name is Aaron. I'm from New Jersey, but I've been living in New York City for the past 17 years, and I think I have a story you might be interested in featuring in one of your videos. So I don't really want to drop this guy's name because I know for a fact that this was a major low point in his life. He definitely isn't a bad guy, just a guy who reached his breaking point one day and just kind of lost it. So that being said, I prefer to keep him anonymous, so I'm just going to call him Dave. Me and Dave were familiar with each other, but not particularly close. Enough that I might, knock on his apartment to borrow a tool or a cup of sugar or whatever, and we'd say hey to each other if we happened to catch each other on the stairs. So this one day when Dave knocked on my door, and he actually seemed kind of angry. And when he accused me of talking too loudly, I just straight up was feeling confused. I hadn't been talking at all, and the only noises were me cooking dinner while I listened to a podcast on my phone. So I told him that, even showed him inside, and was like, "Is this the noise you were hearing?" Obviously, it wasn't, as the walls that separate our apartments were pretty thick, something you pay a serious premium for in NYC. I knew darn well that it couldn't have been the podcast on my phone, no bass to the thing at all, but I still showed him as a demonstration of good faith. He looks all confused too, thanks me, then walks back to his apartment after saying something about it probably being the people downstairs. A few days later, same thing happens, only Dave is seriously angry, not just a little peeved. He then accuses me of talking way too loud, and not only that, but talking about him behind his back. Saying all this shady stuff about him sounded like it was on the phone to another person too. Again, I told him no, that I hadn't been talking about him, and I thought that he was an okay dude, and that even if I was talking about him, it wouldn't be negative. He seems satisfied enough with this, but just as he heads off to his apartment, grumbling about terrible neighbors, I ask if I can come over to his apartment to see if I can hear where the talking is coming from. He says sure, and I walk over, fully expecting to help him solve the mystery of the loud neighbors. But then, when I walk into the TV room in his apartment, it's quiet as the grave. Like you could have seriously heard a mouse fart in there. I then asked him the dreaded question, if he could still hear the people talking, and he just turns and looks at me to say, "You can't hear that?" He then puts an ear right up to the wall connecting to my apartment, nods and says, "I can still hear it coming from the wall. It has to be those downstairs neighbors. I already told them one by one, and they're still taking me for a complete idiot." As you can probably guess, I put my ear to the wall and heard absolutely nothing. And that's about the point that I realized that something was going horribly wrong with Dave's mental health. I tried to suggest that to him in the most delicate way possible, in a way that would seem both respectful and concerned, but good God if he didn't just totally explode on me, saying, "You think I'm crazy? Well, F you, buddy. Get the F out of my apartment, you gaslighting mother effer," quote unquote. I legitimately thought that he was about to knock my teeth out as I edged back towards the door. He was so angry that by the time I was out in the hallway, his eyes were bulging, and there was froth literally coming from his mouth. I mean, he looked like he was about to blow a gasket or something. After he slammed the door in my face, I walked back to my apartment and started Googling what to do if your neighbor is having a mental breakdown. Turns out you can get, a crisis team to come out to visit people if they're showing signs of hurting themselves or others. But that seemed like the nuclear option at that point. Like I didn't want to have the men in white coats show up for the guy, and that seemed like such an extreme solution to something that might pass within a day or two if he just had some time to relax or whatever. It took less than 48 hours for the whole thing to blow up, and when it did, it was bad. It was the middle of the night when I woke up to the front door of my apartment getting pounded on, and before I can even ask what was going on, I hear Dave's voice like, "Open the door, you piece of trash. I told you what would happen if you talked about me again. Well, now you're dead." And he's screaming this. He hadn't told me anything. We literally hadn't spoken since the day he threw me out of his apartment. Whatever little interaction he'd had either been with someone else or it had occurred entirely inside his head. I remember rushing back to my laptop, bringing up that NYC Crisis Emergency Service website, and then feeling my stomach drop as I saw they only took calls between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. I knew if I actually called the cops, it'd probably turn out really, really bad. If they showed up and Dave rushed them, he might end up getting shot. Even getting tased and beaten would be bad enough, and I'd feel terrible about that. But then, as I looked over at my apartment door, hearing Dave screaming about how he was going to kill me while the door was literally shaking on its hinges, I realized I didn't really have any other choice. I tried one time to reason with him, told him I called 911 and if he didn't stop hammering on my door like he was, but he literally screamed back at me, "Call them. It's you who'll take away in cuffs, you mother effer." And I swear to God, his voice sounded different. He was so detached from reality by that point that he legitimately thought that he could get me arrested for something. So when I told him I was on the phone to 911 asking for any kind of mental health assistance, he went right back to his apartment and called them himself. I know that because about 15 minutes into the call, the operator named him first and second name and told their dispatch center had just received a complaint against me, coming from a guy that sounded completely out of control. They sent the cops out that night, but Dave somehow managed to act normal enough for them to leave without arresting him for anything. They also knocked on my apartment too, though, which is how I gave them the lowdown on everything that had been happening. He didn't get any serious help until later that day when the mental health team knocked over to talk to him about his behavior. I swear to God those people are a literal godsend, and I have no idea how they did it, but they managed to just convince him into coming with them to get checked into somewhere for a few days so he could get some medication. They left his apartment door open when they were talking to him, and I was leaning my head out into the hallway to listen in on what was going on. I only have a faint idea of what was said, but as they were leaving, Dave was in tears. I told him I was sorry for having to call the cops, but that I needed to get him some help, and he was just crying like a baby saying, "I know, dude. I'm sorry too." I just shut my apartment door when they were gone, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't shed a tear too. It was just an awful thing seeing someone all broken down like that. I didn't go visit him in the hospital, and I didn't think it was my place to do something like that. Besides, he had an ex-wife and a kid who still cared about him enough to go visit, as well as a few brothers and sisters who brought him food and other home comforts. I only found out what actually happened when he came back a month later, and I went over to check on him to see if he was okay. Turns out he'd had a friend pass from cancer at home, and he'd been one of the 2 people going over to make sure that he was as comfortable as possible. Guy couldn't afford the hospital bills, as he had no savings or insurance, so this 40-something dude just had to lie in bed at home, racked with pain until his body finally just gave up and died. Dave and this other caregiver had been there at the time, and he said that he couldn't sleep for days afterwards. Not long after that, he started hearing voices in the walls, and well, the rest you guys know already. I suppose I want to make clear that this isn't just a scary thing that happened to me. There's kind of a lesson to it too. If you know of someone whose mental health appears to be suffering in some way, like seriously on a steep descent, then do not hesitate in contacting someone. I should have called that crisis team the moment it became clear that Dave was hearing things that weren't really there, but I hesitated, and that could have been a fatal mistake. Either Dave could have hurt himself, or he could have hurt me or one of our neighbors, and because I was one of the few people to notice what was going on, I think I'd have had to shoulder some of the blame for anything that occurred. I'd like to live in a world where we all take care of each other a little more and it's not just physical health that's important. Anyways, thanks for reading, and I hope it wasn't too much of a bummer towards the end. I just wanted people to understand that Dave wasn't a bad guy at all. He'd just gone through a traumatic experience that I honestly think would drive most people crazy. I just hope people can learn from this indirectly so that if someone in their lives needs help, they can be the person that gets them the assistance they need before it's too late. So, I go to this comedy club in NYC called The Stand, and a few years back something happened that was literally anything but funny. This one week, these two comedians had a roast battle, which is basically just two guys saying a bunch of mean but funny stuff about each other in front of the audience. Generally, whoever makes the audience laugh the most wins a round, and then it's whoever has the most points out of 5 rounds is the winner. This one guy wins by definitely a mile, and the other guy is joking about how he's going to get him back, stuff like that. They should have a rematch the next week. The club actually books it, and since it was such a good roast battle, pretty much the exact same audience and more show up for the show the following week. The way the club is set up, there's no backstage or whatever, so the comedians just sit at the bar in a little closed-off area until they're ready to do their sets, and then they literally have to walk through the crowd to get to the stage. So it looked like the guy who lost the roast battle hadn't showed up, and when this gets announced, everyone is groaning, disappointed that they weren't going to see the rematch, so instead, the winner gets invited up just to do a normal set. Then, as he's walking to the stage, some guy who had been sitting in the audience in a hoodie stands up real fast, pulls a gun from his pants, and just fires a shot at the guy, who then hits the floor hard. People freaked out. They started running for the exits, screaming and crying. Some people tackle the shooter whilst others run to see if the comedian's okay. Then as I look around, because I'm in the process of running myself, I see the comedian suddenly up on his feet, and he just looks like sorry, is the only way I can think to describe it. Then the shooter, the guy in the hoodie, has already pulled his hood down, and it's the dude who lost the roast battle. Basically, they'd come up with an idea to fake a shooting to make it look like the loser wanted some serious revenge. Only I can't think of a dumber prank to pull in a packed comedy club like that. I mean, it was like shouting fire in a crowded theater thing, you know? People could have actually died from people getting crushed, and I think we're actually lucky that it didn't go down like that. The comedian had to rush onto the stage and get on the mic to say stuff like that it was a prank, people. Everyone calm down, it's just a prank, it's not a real gun. The guy had used a fake, but was some kind of firecracker to make the noise and all that stuff. I mean, I'm not 100% sure how he did it, but it was convincing enough to scare the life out of almost everyone in the club. Both people were banned from performing there, and I think the fake shooter actually got a visit from the cops afterward for inciting a panic or something of that nature. It wasn't funny at all, obviously. It was one of the scariest things I've ever been a part of. Back in the late 70s, I was 18 years old, and I was still living with my mom and dad down in Kentucky. I'd always been different, and it was something that myself and my parents had always been aware of. But around the age of 18, I realized why I felt so different to the rest of the people in my small country town. Right around that time, most of my friends were chasing girls, and had given up on pretty much everything else except to pursue more hormonal inclinations. But me, I never had any interest in girls. I always felt more attracted to my male friends, and for the longest time I thought it was just that something was wrong with me. But then, the more liberated society became, and more people talked about queerness, the more I realized that they were actually talking about me. So instead of living a lie, I decided to face my truth and to share it with those close to me. So, in 1977, I decided to tell my mom, dad, and sister that I was gay. It did not go well. We were a conservative Christian family who lives in the Bible Belt, and not only were my parents outraged that I dared succumb to such sinful desires, but they told me that as long as I wanted to live like that I wasn't welcome in their home. So, what choice did I have other than to pack up and move somewhere that would actually accept me for who I was? That was how I decided on New York City. It took me about a month or two to properly orient myself to the gay scene here, but in the end, I started hanging out at a few different places that made me feel more and more at home. For a young gay man, New York City was like a paradise back then. Yeah, there were ignorant people, but there are ignorant people everywhere. But in NYC, most people just didn't care, were too busy to care about stuff like that, and I can't tell you how liberating it was. But over the years that followed me moving there, the paradise I'd found became more like a living hell. And to a lot of us, it was like there was some deadly phantom stalking me and my friends, a demon that stalked us, found us, and killed us, one by one. I remember it started with a friend of mine who was named Patsy. Patsy's real name was Patrick, and he felt much more comfortable using his drag name, Patsy, as it made him feel much more like herself, so to speak. Patsy used to join us for drinks at the Black Rabbit most Friday nights, and occasionally he'd show up in drag to sing in the karaoke shows. Those were some of the most amazing, hilarious nights of my life, and Patsy really knew how to work a crowd. But then this one Friday, Patsy didn't show up, and Patsy always showed up to Friday night drinks. We were all pretty concerned for him, but it made sense when somebody closer to him than we were mentioned that he wasn't feeling like himself lately. There was a pretty nasty cold going around at the time, so we figured that he picked it up and was feeling under the weather. Then, the next Friday, he didn't show up again for Friday night drinks, and he wasn't the only one. A few more of the guys closest to Patsy weren't showing up at their regular haunts, and nobody could get a hold of them to find out what was going on. We eventually found where Patsy lived after talking to a club manager who had given him a part-time job. He had an address from his old copy of his payroll. We didn't know exactly what was going on at that time, and some of us actually thought that he might be depressed after a breakup or something, that it was some kind of mental health crisis, and that all Patsy needed was a little love, and he'd be back to his usual self. We couldn't have been more wrong. By the time we went to visit Patsy at his apartment, it was about 6 weeks since he first dropped off. Me and a friend of mine went over to his place only to find a moving truck outside. We didn't think anything of it at first, until we got up to Patsy's apartment and saw that the moving guys were in the process of emptying his apartment. His landlord was supervising the whole thing, so we asked what was going on and if he knew where Patsy was. That's when he tells us that Patsy's in the hospital, and that he hadn't paid rent in like 2 months, so he was moving all of his stuff into storage and would be sending Patsy the bill. All he knew was he was in the hospital, and he didn't know which hospital, so we set about calling up almost every hospital in the city just to find him. It took days, but eventually we found the place where Patsy was staying at. When we asked what was wrong with him, the nurse said that she couldn't tell us, but that we were free to visit during visiting hours so we could talk to him. We'd missed the allotted time slot for that day, so me and the friend that had helped me find Patsy agreed to meet up at Beth Israel the next day so we could go visit Patsy. But I don't think that we could have ever been ready for what we saw. When we walked into the room, we barely recognized the man we saw. Patsy was always a little plumper than most, probably because of his unapologetic love of pasta due to his Italian heritage. But the man we saw when we walked into that hospital room was little more than a skeleton. Patsy was wasting away in that hospital bed, and he was so weak that he could barely talk. We all just broke down crying without even really saying a word to each other, and I'll never forget how the tears pooled in Patsy's sunken eye sockets before they actually started rolling down his cheeks. We went back almost every day for almost a week, until one day we showed up and the nurse told us that we weren't permitted to visit with him anymore. When we asked why, the nurse told us that Patsy had some kind of infectious disease, and that it was too dangerous to sit with him unless we wore proper protective clothing. We insisted on it, that we didn't mind taking the risk, and we'd wear anything they'd asked us to in order to be able to visit him. They made us wear full gowns, gloves, a mask, a hairnet, like full surgeon's clothing just to be in the same room as him. Then one day, we went in to see Patsy, and we were told that he'd passed away in the night. There were lots of us in NYC at the time, much like myself, who had moved there because we didn't have anyone else. We had no family, none that wanted to know us anyway, and it was exactly the same with Patsy. We found out that no one was coming to claim his body or organize a funeral or burial for him, so if we wanted to have any kind of memorial, it was down to us to do it. Of course, we knew it was the right thing to do, and we knew Patsy had enough friends to pack out a church or a memorial hall or something. Only, that's how we found out how bad this whole thing was getting, when we organized a funeral and next to nobody showed up. It wasn't that he wasn't popular. It was a combination of two things. The first was that more and more of us were coming down with whatever horrifying disease that had taken Patsy, and the second was that so little was known about it, that people honestly thought that they could just catch it from being in the same room as his dead body. And then there was all the prejudice and bigotry that surrounded what they called GRIDS at the time. It stood for something like Gay-Related Immunodeficiency Syndrome or something, like they still thought it was specific just to gay people, and even regular non-bigoted people just ate that up since it was coming from the scientific community. Over the years that followed, we were almost completely abandoned by everyone who had once supported us in our lifestyle choices. Me and the friend I was close to stopped dating completely since we were eventually told that it was spread through having intimacy. That was a weird relief to us because at least we knew how to avoid catching it by then, and as much as it was awful having to put our dating lives on hold, anything was better than dying in such a horrifying way. Things got better over the years, and I personally took part in a lot of activism to be able to spread the truth about GRIDS until it was finally reclassified with the name it's known as today, AIDS. That felt like a real victory, for people to know the truth about it and how even straight people could catch it if they weren't careful about drug use and safe contraception, all that kind of stuff. Then it wasn't just something that only gay men could get. It wasn't God's punishment, as so many evil bigots had said. We were all in it together, all united in fighting such a terrifying and insidious disease. When the likes of Freddie Mercury died from AIDS, as well as Eazy-E from the NWA rap group, that's when things started to get much better for us. Those were sad, sad deaths, and the gay community was devastated, especially for Freddie. But I remember being left with the impression that a lot of people didn't have to die, and that if they'd only listened to us instead of just dismissing our claims, then a lot more people would have been spared such horrible deaths. It's a time in my life that I'm still haunted by today, a time when it was like an invisible killer was stalking through our tight little community. So many of us had run away from getting hurt, beatings, and death, and it was like death had followed us. I don't know why that it got to be me that survived when so many of my adopted family didn't. I don't think I was doing anything different at the time, and I suppose it just comes down to luck that I was sleeping with certain people and not others. I still feel guilt, a lot of guilt, that people like Patsy, who used to light up the rooms that he was singing in, had to die, while I got to carry on living in the shadow of one of the most terrifying diseases the world has ever known. Back when I first moved up to New York, the fumes from the traffic outside made my asthma come back with a vengeance. I ended up going to a doctor, and he said that I didn't have to worry anymore because he had this top-of-the-line asthma medication that would completely rid me of my symptoms. I was over the moon when he told me that, as I was having a really rough time, like couldn't sleep and stuff because of it. So I got the prescription, hit up a local pharmacy for the pills, then got home and took like 3 of them immediately so I could finally get some decent sleep. I take the pills, take a shower, grab a bite to eat, and then I head to bed and read a book until my lungs untighten and I start to feel sleepy. I remember turning my lamp off before I settled down to go to sleep, and the last thing I did was cuddle my cat and be like, finally, we can get some sleep, don't it? From memory, this would have been maybe 10:30 at night, so it was still relatively early, especially by Brooklyn standards. Then at maybe 1:30 in the morning, I woke up, still with nice clear lungs, but when I opened my eyes, I saw a short, dark shape standing in the middle of my bedroom. I immediately shot up out of bed, switched on the lamp on my bedside table, and got ready to either kick whoever's butt or run screaming from the room. But when the light lit up the room, there was absolutely nothing there. It looked like it could have been a kid. It was that short, but then it was also way too bulky to be a kid. It looked like a smaller version of a large, muscular grown man. Needless to say, I was seriously unsettled by what I saw, or what I thought I saw, and the whole thing basically ruined any chance I had at a decent night's sleep, as I was absolutely terrified to see that thing again. I only really fell back asleep as I saw the dawn start to break outside, and then about an hour later I had to be up for work. The next day, I was terrified, talking to my friends in a group chat, but they just thought that it was hilarious, telling me that there's no such things as ghosts and whatnot, and that I must have just imagined the whole thing. When I saw on my grandma's grave that not a word of what I was saying was a lie, they just carried on making fun of me, telling me to get an exorcist and all this nonsense, and that if I was going to make up a ghost story, at least make it spooky. But I wasn't making anything up. I didn't believe in the supernatural or anything like that, but what I experienced had me seriously questioning whether I'd been right to just assume it was all nonsense. Because what else explained what I saw and how quickly it disappeared? When they finally started to believe me, one suggested I'd been experiencing some kind of sleep paralysis. They had a cousin that had gone through a literal nightmare of a time dealing with a condition that made it feel like there was some kind of demon in the room with them at night, and they couldn't do a single thing to stop it because they couldn't move. Only that didn't make sense, because the moment I saw the shape of the thing, I jumped up and turned my light on to see if anything was there, which is right when the thing just seemed to completely disappear. That's when my buddy starts getting seriously concerned for me. I think he finally started to appreciate that I wasn't just making stuff up. After that, he actually starts trying to help me figure it all out, and we go through a ton of different medical conditions and stuff before he finally asked me if I'm on drugs. He meant like actual illegal drugs or whatever, but that's when it hit me. I was on a new medication for my asthma, and the medication was Singulair. I grabbed the box, took out the little piece of paper on the inside, then started reading through the side effects. That's how I found out that in some cases, your first few doses can cause waking dreams around your sleeping hours, like brief hallucinations that are basically just dreams bleeding over into reality. It was such a relief knowing I wasn't going crazy, and even more of a relief knowing that nothing remotely supernatural was going on, because I can't even describe how terrifying of a concept that was to me. I'd grown up not believing in anything like that, and that sudden but false realization that spirits, demons, whatever you want to call them, were real. That's a feeling of terror that I don't think I'll ever forget. So just a little warning out there. Be careful with Singulair, because as much as it did a great job in ridding me of my asthma symptoms, I went right back to using my inhaler. No, it wasn't nearly as effective, and I still had a lot of trouble sleeping for a while until I finally moved to a less air-polluted city. But it was way, way better than suffering from hallucinations, especially scary ones in the middle of the night. During the summer of 1977, New York City experienced the most intense heat waves of its long and fabled history. Temperatures peaked on July 21st at a blistering 104 degrees, and the sweltering temperatures became ingrained on the city's collective psyche. But for many, the heat isn't the only thing they remember about the summer of '77, because that same year, the streets of the Big Apple were stalked by one of the most deranged and merciless killers the city has ever known. The murders this person committed were wrapped up in a parcel of mental illness, depravity, and devil worship. And the name he gave himself was one that would strike fear into the hearts of New Yorkers for a generation. That name was Son of Sam. A year earlier, in the early hours of July 29th, 18-year-old Donna Loria and her 19-year-old friend Jody Valenti were sitting in Valenti's Oldsmobile in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx. They had each spent the night at New Rochelle's Peach Trees, a popular disco venue in the area, and were engaged in a playful discussion regarding some boys they had spoken to that evening. It's believed that they were parked just outside Donna's Pelham Bay home, and when the conversation was over, Donna opened up the passenger side door with the intention of climbing out of the car. Yet as she did so, she was suddenly startled when she spotted a man who appeared to be approaching the car at a rapid pace. According to Jody Valenti, Donna found this sudden intrusion to be very irritating and said aloud, "Now what is this?" Those proved to be her final words, and almost as soon as she spoke, the strange man produced a pistol from a brown paper bag, aimed it with both hands, and opened fire. The first bullet ripped through Donna's skull, killing her instantly, while the second struck Jody in her left thigh. Then just as suddenly as he had appeared, the gunman turned and disappeared. Thankfully, Jody Valenti survived the gunshot wound and later described her friend's killer to investigating homicide detectives. She told them that he was a white male in his early 30s who appeared to be around 5'8" and 200 pounds, with dark curly hair. Frighteningly, this description was echoed by Donna Loria's father, who told police that he had spotted a man sitting in a yellow compact car that was parked near to his home on the very same night his daughter was shot. The Loria's neighbors also confirmed a similar-looking vehicle had been cruising the neighborhood that night, as if the driver was searching for a particular person. 3 months later, 20-year-old Carl Denaro and his 18-year-old girlfriend Rosemary Keenan were sitting in the car in the Queens neighborhood of Flushing when one of the windows suddenly exploded inward. As they sped away, the couple didn't even realize that someone had been shooting at them, despite the fact that Carl was bleeding from a bullet wound to his head. He later said he believed it had been caused by flying glass and was stunned when he realized that if the bullet had traveled just a few inches to the left, his brains might have been blown out. Just a month after that, teenagers Donna Damasi and Joanna Lamino were walking home from a midnight movie showing when a man in military-style fatigues approached them. They later told police that he began to ask them directions in a high-pitched voice, yet suddenly stopped talking as he produced a revolver and opened fire. Each girl was shot once before their attacker fled the scene, and neighbors later said that they witnessed a blond man running away from the scene of the shooting with a revolver in his left hand. Miraculously, both girls survived the shooting, but Joanne Lamino was left paralyzed as a result of ballistic damage to her spine. 2 more shootings occurred in January and March of 1977, with each resulting in a single fatality, and the string of attack had left the panic-stricken citizenry of New York City demanding answers. This resulting in an NYPD press conference being held on March 10th of 1977, where it was officially announced that the same .44 Bulldog revolver had been used in each of the shootings. To their infinite horror, New Yorkers learned that a serial killer was stalking the streets of their beloved city, but they had no idea the intensity of the terrifying sequence of events that were about to unfold. Just after 3 a.m. on April 17th, college-age couple Valentina Seriani and Alexander Esau were sitting in their car on the Hutchinson River Parkway service road in the Bronx. They were just a few blocks away from the Loria Valenti shooting when 4 bullets ripped through the frame of the vehicle. Both were shot in the head, and tragically, both would lose their lives as a result of the shooting. New Yorkers were horrified, but not nearly as horrified as they would be when they learned of the handwritten letter that was found near the victims' bodies. It was written mostly in black capitals and was addressed to the NYPD captain Joseph Borelli, and despite attempts to keep the letter's contents a secret, a number of excerpts were subsequently leaked to reporters. Some of it read as follows, and some listeners may find it to be extremely disturbing. "I am the son of Sam, and I am a monster. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house some rest, mostly young, their blood drained, just bones now. I am on a different wavelength than everyone else, programmed to kill, and to stop me, you must kill me. I am the monster. I am Beelzebub. I love to hunt. I live for the hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. Let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back. Bang, bang, bang." Yours in murder, Mr. Monster. Media outlets consulted scores of psychologists who noted that the killer seemed to gain a great deal of gratification from eluding law enforcement. Police then released a psychological profile of their suspect, who was described as most probably suffering from an intense form of paranoid schizophrenia, which in turn manifested itself in the belief that they were a victim of demonic possession. Just over a month after the handwritten letters were discovered next to the bodies of Alexander Esau and Valentina Suriani, Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the son of Sam. On the envelope, neatly hand-printed in 4 precisely centered letters, were the words, "Blood and family, darkness and death, absolute depravity, 44. Some of the letter reads as follows. Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Hello from the cracks in the sidewalks of NYC, and from the ants that dwell in these cracks and feed in the dried blood of the dead that has settled into the cracks." The killer then addressed Jimmy Breslin himself with the line, "JB, I'm just dropping you a line to let you know that I appreciate your interest in those recent and horrendous 44 killings. But you can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria. She was a very sweet girl, but Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood. I am like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam." The letter's author signed it simply Son of Sam, and underneath the sign-off was a series of several symbols. The author also included the moniker the Wicked King Wicker, which furthered law enforcement's belief that the killer held a fascination with the occult. As a result, the NYPD arranged a private screening of the 1973 occult horror movie The Wicker Man and encouraged its homicide detectives to attend. A week later, the New York Daily News published the letter, and Jimmy Breslin personally urged the killer to surrender himself. The edition of the paper which included the latter article became the highest-selling edition in the Daily News history, with over 1 million copies being sold all over the tri-state area. What had once been a panic among New Yorkers turned into a frenzy, and some took certain steps in order to avoid becoming victims themselves. It was noted that all the shooting victims to date had long, dark hair, and in response, thousands of New York females cut their hair short and applied brightly colored dyes, with some even purchasing blonde wigs in the hopes of avoiding the killer's attention. The demand was so great that there was a mass shortage of wigs in the city, and businesses that were in possession of them ramped up the price to make a quick buck, much to the ire of the general public. June of 1977 saw Son of Sam return to his grisly work, when Sal Lupo and his girlfriend, Judy Placido, were shot at close range in a nightclub parking lot just before 3 in the morning. Thankfully, both victims survived their wounds, but one of Son of Sam's next victims would not be so lucky. Just 2 days after the 1-year anniversary of the first shootings, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante were sitting in the latter's car, parked under a streetlight near a city park in the neighborhood of Bath Beach. They were on the first date, and romance was very much in the air, so much so that they were completely unaware of a man approaching the passenger side of the vehicle. The man fired 4 bullets into the car, striking both Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante in the head before fleeing the scene. Robert was blinded in his left eye as a result of the attack, while sadly, Stacy passed away as a result of her injuries. Moskowitz's passing marked the 6th Son of Sam murder in just over a year, and New York City had been driven half mad with fear and suspicion. But it was that same suspicion, along with excellent police work, that finally brought the Son of Sam to justice. Given that 2 murders had occurred in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx, parking was temporarily forbidden in an area of almost 5 square blocks, and any car that lingered too long was investigated and ticketed. This is how a 1970 four-door yellow Ford Galaxy came to the police's attention, and they noted with grim interest that it matched the description of the car that was in Donna Loria's neighborhood on the night that she was killed. When the police contacted New York's Department of Motor Vehicles, they discovered the vehicle was registered to a one Mr. David Berkowitz, who lived up in Yonkers. The next day, police investigated Berkowitz's car, which was parked on the street outside his apartment building. It was then that they spotted a revolver in the back seat, and after searching the car, they also found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd of the Omega Task Force. After that, it was clear. Berkowitz was the son of Sam. All they needed was an arrest and a confession. But given how dangerously violent the son of Sam was, police decided to wait for Berkowitz to leave the apartment rather than risk a violent encounter in the building's narrow hallway. They also needed to wait until a search warrant for the apartment could be properly obtained, as officers were terrified that their search might be challenged in court and that the infamous killer they'd longed searched for would subsequently slip through their fingers. When Berkowitz exited the apartment building at about 10 p.m., a detective, John Falatico, approached the driver's side of his car and pointed his gun close to Berkowitz's temple, all while Detective Sergeant William Gardella pointed his gun from the passenger side. It's then that Berkowitz smiled, looked up at Detective Falatico, and said, "Well, you got me." "Now that I've got you," Detective Falatico responded, "who have I got?" "You know," Berkowitz said, in what Falatico remembered as a sweet, almost childlike voice. "No, I don't. Tell me," he replied. Berkowitz, still smiling, simply replied, "My name is David Berkowitz, and I am the son of Sam." Upon searching Berkowitz's apartment, police officers discovered it was covered in satanic graffiti. They also found diaries that he had kept since he was 21 years old, in which Berkowitz had meticulously noted hundreds of arsons that he claimed to have set throughout New York City. Some sources speculate that this number might be over 1,400. Just after 1 a.m. on the morning of August 11, 1977, Mayor Abraham Beame was visibly relieved as he announced to the media that the people of the city of New York can rest easy because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the son of Sam. All it took was 30 minutes of interrogation before Berkowitz confessed to the shootings and expressed an interest in pleading guilty. Berkowitz then made the outrageous and infamous claim that his neighbor's dog was one of the reasons that he killed, stating that the dog was possessed by an ancient demon and that it demanded the blood of pretty young girls. A few weeks after his arrest, Berkowitz sent a letter to the New York Post in which he repeated his original story of demonic possession, yet toward the end of it, he made an extremely chilling claim. "There are other sons out there," he wrote. "God help the world." Finally, on June 12th of 1978, David Richard Berkowitz was handed 6 consecutive life sentences to be served in Attica Correctional Facility, an upstate New York supermax prison. But that wasn't the end of Berkowitz's story, because as he'd made it clear, there are other sons out there. And once he was locked up, he was determined to prove that he wasn't the only killer that had stalked the streets of New York during that long, hot summer. In the year that followed his incarceration, Berkowitz mailed a book about witchcraft to a police department in North Dakota. He had highlighted several of the book's passages and had written notes in the margins, including Arliss Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California Stanford University. This was in reference to the murder of 19-year-old Arliss Perry, who had been killed at Stanford on October 12th of 1974. Even more horrifying was the fact that her corpse had been mutilated in the Stanford campus chapel, with Berkowitz claiming that not only was this a deliberate act of Satan worship, but that he had personally communicated with Arliss's killer. Berkowitz went on to claim that he had killed at the behest of a satanic cult that he had joined in the spring of 1975, and stunned the general public when he claimed that he was only guilty of the murders of Donna Loria, Alexander Esau, and Valentina Suriani. He asserted that several other cult members were involved in every incident by planning the events, providing early surveillance of the victims, and acting as lookouts and drivers at the crime scene. Yet when asked to provide the names of his accomplices, he claimed that he wouldn't be able to without putting his family's lives at risk. At this point, Berkowitz seemed to make a very convincing assertion, and that was how some victims had only survived because a female cult member was unfamiliar with the powerful recoil of a .44 Bulldog. This negatively affected her accuracy, which in turn saved the lives of Carl Denaro and Rosemary Keenan. Despite the feasibility of such a claim, Berkowitz's assertions were dismissed by many of those close to the case, one of which was the recipient of one of his letters, Jimmy Breslin. Breslin rejected his story of satanic cult accomplices, stating that when they talked to David Berkowitz that night, he recalled everything step by step by step. The guy has 1,000% recall and that's it. He's the guy and there's nothing else to look at. Former FBI profiler John E. Douglas, who spent hours interviewing Berkowitz, also expressed his skepticism. He argued that David was an introverted loner, incapable of being involved in group activity. NYPD psychologist Dr. Harvey Schlossberg also stated that he believes the satanic cult claims are nothing but a fantasy concocted by Berkowitz to absolve himself of the crimes, and lacks any serious credibility. In the decades that followed David Berkowitz's arrest and incarceration, the Son of Sam killings remain some of the most notorious serial murders in world history. Not just for their brutality and insane motives, but for the fear they struck in the hearts of innocent New Yorkers all over the city. Berkowitz himself continues to express remorse on Christian websites, having taken up evangelical Christianity in an attempt to save his soul. But if there is anything resembling a just God that casts judgment on us when we die, then I've no doubt whatsoever that David Berkowitz is destined to burn in hell. Hey Joel, found your channel a few weeks back and I have a story for you. I used to live in this apartment building in Queens, New York City, and this one time, some nice lady invited us to an apartment warming when she moved into our building. It was pretty cool. It was nice to meet some of the people in my building that I'd never spoken to in all the years I'd been there, and it was only a handful of people with some bottles of wine, so it wasn't too crazy. But then at one point, right when everyone is talking, we just hear this scream that sounded like it came from down this lady's hallway near her bathroom. Me and this other guy went to investigate, thinking someone from the party had gotten hurt or something, but then realized that not only were the bathroom and bedroom empty, but no one from the party was actually missing. We're just kind of like, so if it wasn't one of us, who screamed? It was way too loud and clear to have come from another apartment, but there was no one there when we went to look, which was instantly after we'd heard it. It totally killed the mood of the party, and we all left not long after with the lady who just moved in being kind of scared to be alone. I would be too. She moved a little while after too, and the apartment had stayed empty ever since. I'm not saying that I live in a haunted apartment building or anything like that. I'm not a person who believes in the ghosts or ghoulies or anything, but something bad definitely happened in that apartment that night. I just don't know what. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear about all these stories and big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, your mom knits socks that smell.